Heirs. Skull Point Alliance Book 1. By Emery Cole. Chapter 1. Vivienne. Bitch, I know you're here. Vivienne held her breath as Ricardo paced within feet of her hiding spot. She prayed he couldn't hear her heart beating, so it seemed like a locomotive blowing its horn. Pounding so hard in her ears, she could barely hear him in her bedroom. In the absolute darkness, under her make-do platform bed, Vivienne propped up the footboard, hoping her ex-boyfriend wouldn't test-kick the bed's bottom support. If he did, he'd quickly discover her hidden there. She hoped it appeared too low to the ground for a body to squeeze under. So far so good. Sirens blared in the distance. Cops. Hurry, hurry please. She sent up a quick prayer, thankful someone had called them. Ricardo should have known he couldn't break down a door without neighbors calling the police. After his voice faded down the exterior hallway, she finally sucked some much-needed oxygen into her lungs. Ricardo. Ex-boyfriend. Wizard. Jerk. She never should have hooked up with him. What was I thinking? Hindsight's 20/20ths. She hunkered down, again barely breathing, listening for him. Even though he seemed to have left, Vivienne didn't move. No. She'd made that mistake once. She'd almost been caught that time, slipping out of her hiding place only to have Ricardo waiting there for her, arms crossed, a knowing smirk on his face. Why doesn't he just leave me the hell alone? The sounds of sirens shut off in front of the slum apartment building she lived in, and vehicle doors slammed. Finally, safety was within reach. She exhaled slowly. Almost there, almost safe. Ricardo wouldn't stick around once the cops started toward her apartment. I will hunt you till the day you die. His hissed words weren't much more than a menacing whisper, but scary nonetheless. Footsteps stomped away. Hopefully he really was leaving, not merely faking. But she couldn't afford to wait any longer, whether he was bluffing or not. Police would make their way up soon. She had to be out before they reached her one-room hole in the wall. She needed to be gone as much as he did. She didn't need cop trouble. After pushing out the fake rail of her bed, she scooted out, grabbed her mini getaway backpack from the hook on the wall and her makeshift getaway costume, a shawl and a scarf to cover her hair. If all else failed, hopefully she could pass as an old woman. I've resorted to this. Me, Vivianne Devereaux, the descendant of witch royalty of New Orleans. She scoffed at her pathetic predicament, living in the armpit of New York, nearly broke, unable to access any of her savings, and unable to use magic to get away from her powerful wizard ex-boyfriend. She stopped at the front door, the damn thing now hung on one hinge thanks to the jerk ex, and peeked into the hallway. The neighbors had the same thing in mind, it seemed. Heads were sticking out of partially open doors. Tenants were fleeing, nervous the law would put a stop to any illicit activities. Vivienne, reject of the former ruling coven of New Orleans, secured her hair beneath a scarf, and pulled the little backpack over the front of her, wearing it like a baby sling. Flinging the shawl over her body and grabbing the cane, she stepped into the hallway, slumping and shuffling toward the elevator, putting on her best little old lady act. Gone was the glory of being a daughter of the powerful. Gone was the life of being Esperance's daughter. Esperance, greatest empath on the continent. Ever since Vivienne had been a young girl, her dream had been to be as powerful an empath as her mother. That dream crumbled just like the rest of her life had when she was only 16. Vivienne shoved those thoughts away, pointless to reminisce about things that would never be. In front of the elevator, she jabbed the one button for the first floor as a few men in NYPD uniforms hurried out, nearly knocking her down. In the roach-infested lobby downstairs, people griped about how the police never arrived on time, while other residents stared at the blue uniforms going in and out of the door. Good grief. What do they think they're doing? So many cops for one little domestic disturbance. She wondered if there wasn't a raid of some sort going on. Oh well, not my business. My business is to get the hell out of here as fast as I can. Vivienne fast shuffled through the group. A redhead near Vivienne's age stepped in front of her, headed in the same direction. Please hold the door, Vivienne called out, putting on her best old woman voice. The redhead looked over her shoulder and smiled. Sure. Be careful of the step. She held out her arm for Vivienne to hold. Perfect. This way anyone who saw them would assume they were granddaughter and grandmother. Hopefully, that anyone would be Ricardo and his henchmen. Vivienne reached out a shaking hand, no pretending there, she was scared as hell. She hooked her fingers around the redhead's arm, careful to touch her sleeve and definitely not her bare flesh. Touching the redhead's skin was the last thing Vivienne needed at this moment. The sensory overflow of reading this woman's life through touch could mess with Vivienne's mind at a time like this. Hell, it could mess with Vivienne on a good day. She and the redhead stepped out of the building Vivienne would never call home again, now that her cover was busted, once more. Would she ever escape Ricardo permanently? The redhead turned left after they exited the building. I'm going to the bus stop. I am too. She figured she might as well. There was no other place to go except away. Any idea what's going on now? The woman pointed behind them, toward their building. All those police officers. Who knows? Vivienne discreetly glanced around in her hunched-over position. Across the street, Ricardo and his flunkies watched the front door. Seemed as though they had overlooked her, probably thought the young redhead next to her was her granddaughter, exactly what she wanted them to think. Vivienne sent a silent thanks to the powers that be for watching over her. Close call. As luck would have it, the city bus arrived a few seconds later. Vivienne took a seat on it, finally able to breathe freely. The young woman took another spot at the front of the bus. Vivienne wiped sweaty palms on the shawl, ready to get rid of it, but reluctant to do so. What if they showed up again? Long ago, before she figured out what a dirtbag Ricardo was, the bastard had cast a spell on her so he could track her use of magic. The enchantment he cast on her would send up the equivalent of a flare each time she performed magic. Not that her skills for casting were anything to write home about. She'd left training too early to learn much of anything. Some which I turned out to be. Vivienne sat back and sighed. Her blood pressure and stress slowly ebbed. A shudder rolled through her. How she wished she could go back in time and undo the moment she'd met Ricardo. To think she'd believed she'd found love. Some love, she smirked. She laid her forehead against the window and closed her eyes. Looking back wouldn't help her future. She didn't know if anything could help her. Life was so tiresome. Running, constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering where she would eat and sleep next. And not even completely sure why he pursued her so vehemently. It's not like he loved her, that she knew for sure now. A tear rolled down her cheek. Her fingers whisked it away. She needed to get it together. This sniveling crap would get her nowhere. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she straightened, then immediately slumped, remembering once more that she was supposed to be in disguise. Not that it mattered now. She should be safe. She reached into her backpack, looking for a tissue. She needed to wipe her runny nose before she became a mess. That was when her fingers encountered something that didn't belong in the bag. Paper? Stiff paper? She pulled it out. An envelope with her name in beautiful flowing script. She stared at it. How did it get there? Her eyes darted to the other riders on the bus. No one looked suspicious or even slightly interested in her. Nor would they have had a chance, she speculated. Magic. That was the only explanation she could come up with. Someone had used magic to put that in there. Unless they did it when I wasn't home. But this was her getaway backpack. She always kept it packed with a few necessities in case she had to bolt suddenly. She hardly ever went into it. She'd learned the hard way to have a getaway bag packed. So how did the envelope get in there? Vivienne slid a finger under the back flap and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The script was as elegant as the one used for her name on the front. Miss Devereaux. You are hereby summoned to Wits and Wiz attorneys in New Orleans, Louisiana, on the behalf of the estate of Adriana Devereaux at your earliest convenience. Regards, Wits and Whiz Attorneys. What the? New Orleans? Earliest convenience? Yeah, try never. Chapter 2. Vivienne. Why never? Because Vivienne didn't particularly feel safe in the town she'd been born in. Plus, she'd never heard of anyone named Vivianne Devereaux. Just because her surname was the same as Vivienne's didn't mean they were related. Who knew if there even really was someone called Vivianne Devereaux? Vivienne had been aware for a long time that all her family was gone. No parents, aunts, uncles, siblings, or cousins. And as if that wasn't enough, New Orleans? Even if she wanted to go back to that forsaken town, how could she possibly travel more than 1,000 miles on her last $55? 55. Pitiful. She couldn't access any of her funds. Not that she was rich. But what she did have she couldn't touch now, thanks to the dirtbag. Ricardo had her bank account and credit cards tracked. The ones he didn't have closed down anyway. She'd had to find jobs where she could get paid cash under the table. Ones that didn't involve addresses and social security numbers and real names. Vivienne sighed and switched city buses, chewing her lip raw while she tried to decide what the hell she was going to do. I can't keep riding bus after bus until I don't have a red cent left. Well, yeah, she could, but what good would that do? She needed a plan. So why did the words on that letter keep coming to mind? Wits and Whiz Attorneys. Attorneys? Was she in trouble? With the law? Or could these be paranormal attorneys? Had she broken any witch laws? There were too many, and some seemed so obscure and outdated that who the hell knew, she could have broken several of them. It wasn't as though Vivienne congregated with witches. She lived a lonely life, avoiding all witchy types. She had to. After her mother and her father were killed in New Orleans, she was taken out of the prestigious Graylands Academy for Witches in Philadelphia and taken back to New Orleans. More like kicked out, she harumphed. She didn't last long in New Orleans. Seemed the same ones that wanted her parents dead wished the same for her. With no family she knew of, she was on her own at 16. Flying solo didn't seem that daunting, but finding the same witches who had assassinated her parents and wanted her dead made matters perilous in New Orleans. There was no going back there. Not if she liked breathing. Why did they want her dead? That was an easy one to answer, but she'd found out the hard way. Because if a Devereaux were alive, there could be no other leader for the Southern Tier Coven. This was ordained. Therefore, as a Devereaux, Vivienne had to be removed. She'd managed to lead an uneventful life once she'd escaped New Orleans and avoided witches and drama. Until that night. Enter Ricardo, enter drama. The city bus Vivienne was on pulled into its last destination, a block from the Greyhound station. Still holding the letter, Vivienne tore it and the envelope into small pieces and deposited them in the first trash can she came to. She wondered if she could get somewhere far away on $55, like maybe California. Too bad Canada wasn't an option, no passport. Her stomach rumbled. She could get a single patty hamburger and small fries for under $5. That would still leave $50 for traveling. She didn't have any idea where to go, at least not yet, so she trudged the block, gripping the cane for safety. A large sign on the other side of the street gave her an idea. Greyhound lines. Might as well see what kind of options Greyhound had. At the ticket window, she pulled out her money, sucked back tears of despair, and looked at the prices on the board. I'm so screwed. The agent, hair in a bouffant that went out of style 30 years ago, with the wrong shade of red lipstick that should never have been allowed to be in style, gave Vivienne an insincere smile. A red smear garnished her front teeth. Vivienne fought the urge to wipe her own teeth in order to let the woman know about the lipstick on hers. And still, the woman hadn't said a word. Customer service at its best. The loneliness of Vivienne's predicament hit her hard. She turned away from the unfriendly woman and studied the board more. No options, really. Surely there had to be a sale on something. Some last-minute discounted ticket? She turned back to the woman. Do you have anything under $50? Except the woman was gone. Vivienne frowned. How the hell did she slip away so quietly? Instead, a man with pale skin and dark eyes watched Vivienne from behind the booth's glass. He glanced down at a list on the counter beneath her view, then looked back up. As a matter of fact, we sure do. Really? She jerked her head up with surprise. Where and when? 15 minutes. New Orleans. Would you like a ticket? Vivienne opened her mouth and nothing came out. What the hell was going on? New Orleans? For less than $50. That wasn't possible. That's it? Only New Orleans? That's it. Some kind of sale. Either stay in New York with Ricardo close to capturing her, or go to New Orleans where they wanted her dead. Some choice. Maybe if she went there and stayed hidden, no one would know she was in town. She'd get a job and save up money to go to Texas and get lost in the Wild West. The thought almost made her laugh. Almost. Yes, I would like to buy a ticket. She slid over 2 20s and a 10, and he slid back a penny and the ticket. Your bus is boarding now, the man said, pointing. She turned to the exit, then spun back to thank him. He was gone. Bouffant woman strode to the counter. Excuse me, where did the man go who was just here? The woman drew down her brows. Do you want to buy a ticket? Vivienne squeezed the one in her hand. No thank you. I'm good. She hurried to the door marked exit and stepped out, looking for the bus going her way. A way she'd never wanted to go. A way she knew she shouldn't go. She shrugged. Chapter 3. Vivienne. A day and a half later, Vivienne stepped off the bus and stretched her arms and legs. The trip from New York hadn't been as bad as she thought it would be, but sitting for hours on end made her knees hurt. Question now was where to go. She needed to find a source of income. A job that would pay cash. Thus far she'd found dishwashing was easiest. No uniforms needed, and restaurants were always hiring dishwashers. And New Orleans had restaurants galore. She just needed to get the lay of the land. And she knew exactly where to go. She eyed the bus station's waiting area. The sign on a door sent her a hint, and her bladder reminded her with a twinge. She picked up a few pamphlets that had maps of the area, and places that could possibly need cheap labor. Sliding the leaflets into her backpack, she made her way to the facilities. Best to use them when she had a chance, that slight twinge could become insistent in a short time. Who knew when the next opportunity would present itself? The line wasn't too long. A stall became available within a few minutes. She slung her pack from her shoulder, slid into the space, closed and locked the swinging door. The stall's door was peppered with advertisements. Her eye caught on one. Wits and Whiz Attorneys. How freaking odd. She quelled a shiver at the idea that she should check it out. It couldn't be a coincidence she was here, could it? The ticket, this sign on the door. She didn't know if she should run away or do some surveillance. Could this be one of Ricardo's machinations? This wasn't Ricardo's style. He was more the brute force type than the kind to send out subtle messages and hints, like tickets, flyers, and invitations. She eyed the address on the flyer while she used the toilet. With a sigh, she finished her business, took down the flyer with the contact information, washed her hands, and headed for the main exit. She'd check out these attorneys' office on the sly, from a distance. See who came and went. Make that her first order of business, just to be sure there weren't any hostiles hanging around, waiting, wishing her harm. A short while later she was counting street numbers, almost there, when a delicious scent of spice and meat met her nose. She knew that scent. Knew it too well. Gumbo. Her stomach growled at the thought of a bowl of gumbo. Her grandmother made the meanest gumbo ever. Back when her grandmother was alive. Back when Vivienne was a kid that happily lived in New Orleans. Back when her parents were still alive. Her heart felt as empty as her stomach. A few paces later, A woman leaned out a door and motioned with a wave for Vivienne to hurry up. Vivienne looked around to see if anyone else was paying attention, or if the woman meant her. With all the craziness of the last day or so, and envelopes and flyers and such, she'd almost believed the woman was waving to her, a complete stranger walking down the street. "Miss," the lady called out, "how about a sample of gumbo?" "Come on. Sample. Be still my beating heart." A sample was better than an empty stomach. Vivienne quickened her step at the promise of food. At the door the brunette said, "It's nice to meet you. I'm Sarah, owner of this here humble little cafe, so shows." Spicy seasonings, the ones that used to permeate her grandmother's kitchen, floated in the air. It almost seemed like home. Vivienne had so few memories of her parents and grandparents anymore. Sarah stuck out her hand for Vivienne to shake. Vivienne hesitated, holding her breath. She didn't want to. Couldn't. Just couldn't put herself through the mental chore of it. She could not touch bare skin. No. Goodness no. She couldn't deal with the bare skin thing. She was so tired, and the flashes that contact with others' skin created inevitably ate through her energy, depleting her mana and draining her. Then again, I'm such a heel. She's offering me a free sample of gumbo. Vivienne eyed the table. That was way more than a sample. It was a huge bowl. The least she could do was shake the woman's hand as a thank you. Vivienne gingerly put out her hand, trying to touch as little flesh as possible. As quickly as possible, she let her fingers glide against the back of the woman's hands. In a flash, parcels of the woman's life coursed through Vivienne. She recoiled from the images, as well as the surge of energy that tore through her. She assessed what she'd felt from Sarah: power. A lot of power. Vivienne wondered what another empath witch would see if she touched Vivienne's hand. A sucky life, that's what. As an empath witch, Vivienne learned long ago that touching her skin to another's let her read the person's emotions and state of mind. Unless that other person was blocking, like Ricardo had done for so long. There was a solution. Vivienne knew if she'd been able to stay long enough at Greylands Academy, she'd have been taught to block this skill of hers, how to control the depths to which it traveled into people. To control the turmoil it could inflict on Vivienne herself. One day I'll find out how. One day. And then I won't have to read people. I won't see their pain, their failures, triumphs, private thoughts, nothing. Help yourself. Sarah smiled. You don't know how much I appreciate this. Truly. She wanted to offer to pay, but with only $5 and no job options in sight, it seemed frivolous to offer. Maybe she could work it off. Do you need help? I'll wash dishes or something. Sarah shrugged, gave her a curious look. You know, for the gumbo. Nope, no need. Dig in. Sarah went about her business, tallying tickets at the register while Vivienne ate. The phone rang. Sarah headed toward the ringing nuisance while Vivienne scarfed down the gumbo. Socho's Cafe, Sarah said, then paused. No. She laughed softly. Wits and Whiz are next door. Another pause, then, you're welcome. She hung up the phone and went back to her tickets and 10-key calculator. That caught Vivienne's attention. Wits and Whiz? Next door? She didn't think she'd come that close. Had she?
Chapter 4. Quick. The waves in the Gulf of Mexico were low, making the boat ride from the island, Skull Point Cay, to New Orleans smooth and enjoyable. The hazy fog-like portal that allowed the boat to glide from the island to the Gulf had begun to fade. Soon the portal that Adriana had created would need to be replaced by another's. Hopefully, that new person was going to be ready to get to work, Quick thought, with a grimace. Guess I'll find out soon enough. He didn't have high hopes. But as long as the designated heir Adriana had put in place would stay out of Quick's hair and let him run the island, everything would be fine. Adriana's heir would have some mighty large shoes to fill. As far as Quick was concerned, no one could do what Adriana had done, or as well as she did it. Quick breathed deeply and let it out. He reluctantly admitted he tended to get intense occasionally. During those times, Adriana would laugh and remind him this was all a little bump in the road of life. Some things weren't worth the toxin and bad stuff the body produced under stress. God, he missed her. The damned lump in his throat returned. Her death was particularly hard on him, knowing he'd been the reason she was dead. After docking and tying the boat securely, Quick headed to the marina's parking lot to get the company's Suburban. Usually, guests of the island were picked up from the airport in the unmarked black vehicle and driven to the docks to load onto the boat. Today, it'd be chauffeuring the new owner, the heir, who would probably bitch and complain about everything. Man, he really needed to cut the negative vibes. He hadn't been this adverse since Adriana found him with a one-way ticket to prison for the rest of his life. If she hadn't taken him under her wing, he had no doubt he'd been dead from a fight in prison or stabbed to death in his cell. He owed everything he was to Adriana, and he'd never forget that. How many times had Adriana told him that she wished he could be her heir? To take her place, to love and care for the people and island as much as she did. If only he were a magic wielder, a warlock or wizard or whatever, instead of a shifter. If only.
Chapter 5. Vivienne. Vivienne put the spoon down with shaky fingers. What's the address here? I didn't think this was next door to the attorney's offices. She hadn't meant to say that out loud. Not at all. Sarah glanced up from the tickets. Well, they are connected to us via a back hallway, but there are a few storefronts between us when you look at it from the street. Why do you ask? Are you a client? Vivienne was beginning to think she'd stepped into a fox's den, and she was just a little bantam chicken. Or maybe this was the Twilight Zone. You know the attorneys? She asked. Yeah. One's my uncle. See? Sarah left the counter and strode toward a door that Vivienne hadn't paid much attention to. She opened it wide. Inside, several people were congregated at a table. 3 to be precise. 2 men and a woman. They looked up from the table where they were seated. Recognition flashed across their faces, as though they knew Vivienne. Vivienne didn't need to be hit with an oversized mallet to know those 3 were not your average, regular humans. Nope, far from it. She rose, ready to bolt. No. Don't go, said one of them, the man with a full head of hair said. The woman smiled. We mean you no harm. You look just like your mother, you know. That brought a burn to the bridge of Vivienne's nose, the burn of unshed tears. Kindness topped with a mention of her mother, that pretty much shoved her into the cry zone. Why was she feeling this sensation of trust from them? Were her empath instincts to be trusted? Could they be trusted, or were these beings ill-doers? There was one way to find out. Shake their hands. What if she was in a locked room with them? Then what? These were clearly magic types. But they aren't Ricardo. That counted for something. And it's not likely they're the ones who killed my parents and want me dead. True, or she'd already be dead. So what did they want? Come please. We've looked and looked for you. Sent signs for you. And sent others as well to find you. Giving her bowl a last, longing look, she stepped into the small conference room. What a waste of food, and who knew the next time she'd get a meal? She turned her attention to those waiting for her. Professionally dressed, but wizards. And a witch. The witch, elegantly attired in a black pencil skirt and an ivory button-down, waved her to a chair. We've been hoping you'd make it. Vivienne raised her brow. So I gathered. Sarah closed the door. Vivienne plopped into a chair, dropping her cane and small backpack with all her possessions beside her. She remained half-perched on the edge of the chair, just in case she needed to bolt. The man who'd originally spoken cleared his throat. Miss Devereaux, may we call you Vivienne? She relaxed a bit, with the attorney's gentle smile. That's fine. I can't remember the last time I used my own name. Life on the run. first from her own kind in New Orleans, then from Ricardo. "This is Ann Withers," he pointed to the woman, then indicated the other man, Tom Whitmore, then placed his hand on his own chest, "and I'm Gerald Wizen. I'm sure you're curious as to the reason you've been called here." "No doubt." She gave him a nod. "I wish it would have been under better circumstances, but that isn't the case." "What's that supposed to mean?" "You see, Vivienne, your great-aunt Adriana has passed away." "Who?" "She didn't have a great-aunt." "Sorry, Mr. Wizen, but I don't have any family. And haven't for a while." Wizen sighed. "Yes, unfortunately, that is what you've been told." Suddenly, she was angry. The kind of fury that starts cold and burns hot. At 16, she was left to her own devices, removed from Greylands, kicked to the curb, fending for herself, becoming prey to Ricardo, and all this wizard could say is, unfortunately. "Yeah, my misfortune." She was so pissed, she was surprised steam wasn't rising from her ears. "So who is this aunt?" "Great-aunt," she corrected herself. Miss Withers smiled. "Your family has a special gift, or power, that many would like to have control over. It has been essential over the years for certain members of your family to disappear, as such. The last one to disappear," Wizen added, "was your great-aunt Adriana." "Wait a minute. If that's so?" She was going to ask if her mother had disappeared. If her father had disappeared. If they were still alive, living somewhere else. But that wasn't possible. Her parents would never have let her live the life she had, if they'd been alive. "What's the name of this aunt?" "Adriana." "Adriana," she repeated, enunciating every syllable, stalling while she searched her memory for that name, for anything associated to it. That name brought to mind an image of one of the many visits Vivienne had with her grandmother, sitting on a sofa, looking through a photo album. She remembered the name Adriana being one of the names Grams had mentioned. She also recalled Grams saying one of her sisters moved away, and they wouldn't see her again for a long time. Was that Adriana? Vivienne fought the urge to puke. Did disappear mean being killed or sacrificed? Is that what they planned for her? Some sort of sacrifice ritual? She pushed away the visual of herself on a slab of stone with a dude holding a ceremonial knife to her throat. She studied the faces before her. They didn't look like the underhanded types. Only one way to know. She abruptly stood. "Sir." She held her hand out, waiting for him to shake it. Wizen looked at her, a dubious expression on his face. "I hope this isn't goodbye." He put his hand out. She shook it. The goodness of his soul, the acts of kindness he'd been involved in, all this flashed through her. He pulled his hand from hers. "Did you get what you need? Or do you need to test my fellow attorneys?" Busted. Of course, he knew she was an empath. That wouldn't have been a secret, not when her mother was renowned for her empath skills. Confusion swirled in her mind. Whom could she trust? Whom should she avoid? "I need to go." She headed toward the door. The group of 3 called after her, but she didn't slow when she reached the door. She jerked it open. Oh hell, that wasn't the door to the cafe, it opened to a long corridor. Unwilling to go back through the room she'd been in with those 3, she headed down the hallway at a run. She was halfway down the 30-yard length when she was brought up short by a force holding her back. Except there was no one touching her. At the end of the corridor, standing next to the attorneys, if they even were attorneys, was Sarah, arms raised, palms out, releasing a stream of energy that left a blue aura behind. The force jerked Vivienne backward, almost knocking her down. She steadied herself and held the wall for support. "Vivienne," Wizen said, speed-walking her way, then stopping in front of her, "I'm sorry if we frightened you. There's been a miscommunication, obviously. There is nothing to worry about. In fact, it's just the opposite. You're the new owner of Skull Point Cay."
Chapter 6. Quick. Thankfully, the drive to Wits and Wiz was short. Quick had been there a few times with Adriana. First, for her to gain legal guardianship over him until he became of age. The second time was to create her will and get the estate settled in case something happened to her. The third was to watch her die. Quick parked the SUV in the dark alley, a block down from Wits and Wiz. He smelled the normal puke, piss, and people. He hated the city smells, and right about now they made him miss Skull Point more than ever. He hurried along the sidewalk, head down, and slipped inside.
Chapter 7. Vivienne. As if I know what Skull Point, whatever is. Vivienne stared at the lawyer, warlock, wizard, whatever he was. Skull Point Cay, he repeated as if Vivienne were stupid, saying the words slowly. It's an island. A cay is an island. Skull Point Cay. Island? Owner? She didn't know shit about islands. Hell, she even hated the open water. And anyway, who owned an island except for movie stars or kings? Maybe billionaires. None of which am I. Would you please come back inside? Wizen asked. After a sigh, Vivienne turned and headed back. I need this explained in regular English. No lawyer talk, okay? They nodded. And no fancy witchery talk. I walked away from the witch thing a long time ago, about the time my own kind dumped me in the street and tried to kill me. We're sorry about that. The other wizard guy, the one with the name that started with wit, stammered about as if looking for words. As if any words could make up for what she went through. Vivienne crossed her arms over her chest and glared at them. At 16, I was alone in this world. I went from having a family and a coven to having nothing. She fumed. Do you know who I lived with? Phi. That's right. That's who gave me a home. Freaking Phi. Witches scorned Phi as an inferior supernatural breed. Tears threatened again, and now she was pissed that she'd gotten angry enough to have tears. All the stuff I was supposed to learn from Greylands about being a witch, about casting spells, guess what? She waited, casting toxic stares their way. She looked from one to the other. What? No guesses? They shook their heads as if ashamed. They should be. The Phi tried to teach me how to cast. Can you imagine that? Her voice raised a few levels. Phi. She fought to gain control of her emotions. I have the casting skills of a toddler. Anything I try to do, I can't do right. And I don't know how to control my empath reading skills. I don't know how to turn them off. Her voice broke at last, anger getting the best of her. Please? Wizen held the door open. Come back in. She entered the room, not touching any of them, not wanting to see what they were about. Whitmore reached into a briefcase and handed her a large envelope full of papers. The details are inside this packet. It's from your great-aunt. Directions, instructions, information. Wait a minute. I don't know the first thing about owning an island. I don't have funds or means to get there even. Nor do I particularly want to be on open water. Ah yes, Wizen said. Thank you for the reminder. He reached into his own briefcase and placed stacks of bills on the table in front of her. Dumbfounded, she stared at the cash. Is it real? Couldn't be. No one except criminals had piles of money like this. What's this for? Yes. It's for you from the trust fund. His perfect smile was overly bright. I have a trust fund. At first, she was thrilled and then it hit her. She'd only have a trust fund until Ricardo found out. Then she'd be back where she was now. Unless. Can I sell the island? It's the island's trust fund, not your personal. His response was interrupted by a sound. A noise that came from behind her. Was that a gasp? She spun around. Holy hell. The most gorgeous man she'd ever seen stood there, glaring at her. Clearly, he hated her with every fiber of his being.
Chapter 8. Quick Alvarez, wolf shifter and the head of Skull Point Cay security, clenched his fists and locked his jaw tightly to keep from releasing a stream of obscenities at the dusky-skinned woman before him. It didn't matter that she was stunning. Nope, that didn't matter. Not one bit. His wolf howled, but Quick wasn't having it. Not a chance. His wolf could like her all he wanted. Quick wasn't so easy to win over. And since when are you easy to win over? He asked his wolf. Sell the island. Part of Quick wanted to throw her into the murky waters of the Lake Pontchartrain and let her drown. Then the gators could get their fill of her. The other part of him wanted to be professional and get her on the island so he could get her to fulfill the role that Adriana clearly wanted for her. He scowled at the woman in front of him. Her full lips were set in a thin line, and he wanted to ask her why she was frowning. It's not like she just heard the new owner wanted to sell her home. If this so-called heir was worth anything, she would have been on the island training with Adriana and ready to take over when Adriana was gone. But Adriana shouldn't be gone. She shouldn't have been taken from life this early. He studied the brunette before him. Dark circles ringed her eyes, as though she hadn't slept. Probably a party girl who enjoyed spending the money Adriana had designated for the island. Yeah, well, screw this new heir. Quick would do what he could to protect Adriana's legacy. Quick. It was one of Adriana's attorneys. The tall one. He couldn't remember their names. Wit something, and, yeah, he completely forgot the final one. Completely. PFT. Who cares? After they finished the formalities with the heir, he'd be on his way, taking her to the island to teach her the ropes as best as he could. He was a shifter by damn, not a magician. Some of the stuff that she needed to learn, a witch or a wizard should have been the one teaching her. Yeah. Geez, he even sounded surly to his own ears. He tried to soften it with a smile, and hope he didn't look like he was snarling. Am I too early? Judging from what he heard about her wanting to sell the island, he might be too late. He worked on the smile, trying to turn it into a friendly grin. So, what's this about selling the island? Oh, the shorter wit something said. It can't be sold yet. There's a provision in the will. He turned to the heir. I'm sorry, we should have told you about that. She crossed her arms, managing to look pretty surly herself. What's the provision? You have to live on the island for a year before you can dispose of it. Dispose. Quick winced at the use of that word. Then again, he didn't say sell. That was a good thing, wasn't it? What? The heir screeched. Heiress, he corrected himself. Damned attorneys called her an heir for so long that he'd not even realized it was a woman anyway. So, the heiress lowered her voice, brushing back dark hair, rubbing her temples. Hungover, probably. She continued, I have to live there. She began to pace the room, and to Quick's amazement was muttering beneath her breath. Had she lost it? His shifter hearing picked up a couple of words. Something about nowhere else to go. Well now, that didn't exactly make him feel very reassured. So, she was out of options. Probably spent all of Mommy and Daddy's money, the spoiled princess brat. Then again, with that ragtag backpack and a scuffed-up cane, he wondered how well off her parents could actually be. She looked damn near homeless. That cane had to be hers. It was next to her, but she was walking around and pacing just fine. What the hell she got a cane for? He wondered if it was a magic cane, then shrugged inwardly. Who the hell knew with these magic types? So, Princess, Quick said. She snapped her head in his direction, eyes glowing with anger. Ah, shit, he cursed himself. Way to start this working relationship with her. She was his boss, after all. Would be. And it wasn't like he could just up and leave the island. He'd promised Adriana that he wouldn't. Man, I need to learn how to shut it sometimes. Don't call me that, she snapped. Do you prefer heiress? Damn. He'd gone and done it again. Adriana always warned him his mouth would get him in trouble. And invariably, it always seemed to. Her eyes were hard. No. Do you prefer D-bag? A smile snuck to his lips, barely curling them before he snatched it back and made his expression unreadable. He liked that sass. This was something he could understand and relate to completely. A little bit of street in her. Yeah, he could work with that. At least, she wasn't going to be some sniveling princess diva. He hoped.
Chapter 9. Vivienne. Excuse me? Can we please start this meeting over? Wizen asked, indicating for Vivienne to grab a seat. Vivienne did so, and was proud of herself for not grumbling. Whitmore came around the conference table and shook the jerk's hand. Quick, good to see you again. Better circumstances this time, I must say. The guy nodded, not taking his glaring gaze from Vivienne's face. Whitmore practically pulled him into the room and shoved him into a chair. The man gave him a dirty look. Quick, this is Vivianne Devereaux, Adriana's heir. His chin lifted and he grunted. Nice. Who is this Neanderthal? Vivienne turned away from his burning eyes. Vivienne. Whitmore was practically begging her with his eyes, reminding her of a puppy dog pleading for treats. What did he want? She stared at him, remaining silent. Whitmore continued, this is Quick Alvarez. As if that means something to me. Wizen cleared his throat. Vivienne, about selling, why don't you visit the island first? Make decisions later. Vivienne didn't have to be a rocket scientist to know she had zero choices at this stage of her life. And she didn't know what she was getting into exactly, but the idea of being able to live on an island and not be found, that was very appealing at this moment. The thing that wasn't appealing. The man called Quick. Who the hell was he? Why did he hate her? Why did he care if she sold the island? Would she have to deal with him after today? The man was hotter than hot, but that temper, those flare-ups, he was a volcano waiting to erupt. And as of right now, it looked like all his firepower would be directed at her when he blew up. Excuse me, she said to Volcano Quick, then turned to the attorneys, her attorneys, if she were to believe them. Not that she needed to excuse herself to him. She didn't even know who the hell he was, and what skin he had in this game. She leaned closer to the attorneys. Who is this guy? What's he doing here? Ann Withers, who'd been relatively quiet thus far, flashed a brilliant smile at Quick, then turned to Vivienne. He's Quick Alvarez. The head of your security. Adriana's? She seemed to fumble for words. She waited patiently, trying not to jump to conclusions. Wizen cleared his throat. What Ann is trying to say, Quick is Adriana's informally adopted son. Yes, that's it. Ann nodded. What do you mean informally adopted? Vivienne was curious about the particular phrasing he seemed to have chosen. He can't be her heir. Which laws prevent that? He can't inherit. Vivienne cocked her head. Why not? He's Ann said. Hello, Quick cleared his throat. I'm right here in the room with you. And I can hear you. Vivienne gave him a stiff smile. Would you like to excuse yourself? His nostrils flared. Would you like to F? Quick. Wizen rolled his eyes as if to say, here we go again. Ann stepped around the table and put her hand on Quick's arm. Let's get you some gumbo. She herded him out of the room. Vivienne, Wizen shook his head, you don't have to commit to anything, not yet. Why don't you give it a shot? Then he said the line that put the hook in deep. Unless you have something better going. She didn't. That was the truth of it. She had absolutely nothing better going. And she was homeless. She looked at the stack of money. She wasn't penniless. Or was she? Would they take it away if she pulled out of this situation? No. She had nothing better going. I'll stick around.
Chapter 10. Quick. Quick got the woman, the heiress, on the boat and a mile out into the Gulf in record time. He was so relieved no one in the city had seen him this time. Or at least hadn't shot at him. Shit. What would he have done if they'd seen him again? And again, killed the person who was the island's owner? He shook his head. That would be the lining on that cloud, a black cloud. Luckily, this time it hadn't happened. As he captained enchantment along the water, he overtly kept an eye on her. She had a cane, but didn't use it on the way to the truck. And her skin, what little he could see, was flawless, except for the greenish tinge she'd had for most of the ride. Said she didn't do water very well. That was obvious. Ahead, the fog that allowed the magic to transport them to the island came into view. He cut the engines to a low idle. Miss Devereaux, now's the time for you to do your thing. She looked up from her lap. Do what thing? He sighed and waved his hand in the air. You know, your magic, your spellcasting. Oh. She looked back down at her papers. Take us the long way, or whatever. I don't cast spells, enchantments, etc. He stared at her. He couldn't have heard correctly. The spell is what gets us to the island. There is no long way. That's what you're here for. That's why Adriana has an heir. Why she was an heir herself. Just drive to the island. It isn't too far from shore, according to the map. You don't understand. Yes, I do. I'm not doing any magic. Keep driving. Her attention went back to the envelope in her lap. He wiped a hand across his sweating face. After a second, he killed the engines. Her head popped up. What are you doing? It's just a bit of fog. It can't be that bad to get through. Frustration filled his chest. He wanted to strangle this woman. He let out a long sigh. Maybe a bit over-dramatically. I'm sure somewhere in that paperwork you're holding, there is a section which describes how the process of getting on and off the island works. She flipped her hand in the air dismissively. I read it. Then you understand that without you doing your thing, we don't get to the island. Adriana's portal is wearing off. She said if it wasn't a strong portal, it could accidentally transport enchantment, this boat we're on, to some other place. One we weren't planning on going to. You see, Skull Point Cay is in another dimension or something. He never really understood how all that magic crap worked. He hadn't had to. Adriana handled it. The island doesn't exist on this planet. It can only be seen if you make it so with your magic. That's what Adriana said. Her angry eyes met his, glowing emerald with their intensity. Look quick. I have a reason I don't want to use magic. She paused and looked out over the water. He waited for her explanation. And waited. Finally she spoke. Is it really true that no one can get on the island unless I let them do my thing, whatever, or are you just saying that? His eyes narrowed. She carried a scent of nervousness. His shifter senses picked it up. And was that fear he smelled coming off her? He needed to answer her question, or she'd think he was lying. Yes, as far as I know. It's not exactly something I'm well versed in. As far as you know. Her brow raised in question. He nodded. Fine, but we make it snappy. Like seconds. I don't want to hold the spell long. He wasn't going to tell her that portals stuck around for a while after they'd gone through, but that not just anyone could see the portal. She flipped through pages and pulled out a sheet. She began the words he'd heard hundreds of times. The air changed, telling him to get in the fog now. Starting the engine, pushing the throttle as fast as he dared to, hopefully to not throw her to the floor, he moved them into the fog. Would have served her right if he'd jerked into motion and pitched her to the ground ass over heels. The twinge he always felt in his stomach when traveling through the fog twisted, and he knew they were on the other side. Sunshine sparkled on the water, flashing like tiny diamonds. The island dock was straight ahead. He gave her a glance as if to say, now what was so bad about that? She did fine. But what he was seeing right now worried him. Her face had paled with beads of sweat on her forehead. The paper in her hand shook. His wolf heard her heart thumping in her chest, pulse screaming. She was deathly scared. Fear had taken over her system. He cut the engines again, then stepped to the side to check on her. He seized her arms to look into her eyes, to see if they were dilated, hopefully, to figure out what was going on with her. She thrashed and squeaked. Quick dropped into the seat, holding her tightly. She shivered, the force of it making her body shudder. She must have had a reason she didn't cast spells, and he needed to know what that was. Not merely for security matters, but for his own sanity. Slowly the boat rocked. Waves held them, swinging side to side in gentle comfort. Her breathing returned to normal, and her heart rate slowed. He released her from his hold, and set her on the seat, then dashed toward the wheel to get the boat moving. Several of his men should be waiting to help with unloading. Relief coursed through him when he saw them on the dock. Quick was planning an immediate escape, secure in the knowledge Maze would make certain all ran smoothly in his absence. When the boat was settled, he jumped onto the dock and strode for the jungle. Over his shoulder he yelled, "Maze, take Miss Devereaux to," he almost said Adriana's, the owner's place. He had to get away from her. She messed with his emotions. In all the wrong ways.
Chapter 11. Vivienne. What an ass. Quick Alvarez is a complete ass. Vivienne stood in the secured boat with her fists on her hips and watched Quick storm up the dock. He didn't even bother to help her. Just shouted orders over his shoulder. A guy on the pier offered her a hand to help her get out of the boat. "Hello, Miss Devereaux. My name is Maze Turner." She remembered his name, an odd one, on the list of important people in the packet the attorney gave her. "Let me help you." Avoiding his flesh, she took his sleeved arm and stepped onto the boarded walk. "Is he always like this?" She waved toward the hastily departing Quick. Maze chuckled. "No. He's usually a nice guy. Especially around the ladies." Of course he would be. He'd probably slept with everything over the age of 20, in a bikini. And he lived on an island that looked like something out of a travel brochure. Figures. Perfect setup for a gorgeous male like him. Anger bubbled up inside her. No, it wasn't anger, it was jealousy. Which was utterly ridiculous. All the way here on the boat, she tried to keep her attention on the packet in front of her instead of his presence. No man had ever drawn her attention so fast, except Ricardo. That thought worried her. She could not have another person like Ricardo in her life. No one would control her life or keep her locked up. If she kept her heart and her magic to herself, everything would be all right. She hoped. Maze was still talking, bringing her back from her thoughts. "Everyone is excited to meet you." That was a surprise. "Me? Why me?" "You're the new owner." "Yes, but I don't intend to be very hands-on. In fact, I'll probably be incognito most of the time, hanging out on the beach." She smiled, hoping that was the right thing to say. Don't employees always want their boss to go away and let them do their job? As the owner, wasn't she the boss? As Maze's smile withered, she guessed that wasn't the best choice of words. Oh well, they'd come to love being autonomous, with no boss looking over their shoulders. He searched the boat behind her. "No luggage, miss?" Her cheeks flushed hot. Everything she owned was in the backpack slung across her shoulder. Maze brightened, his smile returning. "No worries. We got everything here you'll ever need. So you didn't need to bring all that stuff anyway. Very smart." He winked at her. She relaxed, knowing he wasn't asking questions she didn't want to answer. "This way. I'll take you to your home." Home. Did they think she was staying here forever? Not that she had a life elsewhere, but still. She followed him up natural rock stairs, to a cute bungalow next to what looked like a large building, like a resort, or a place where you'd have a convention or a conference. The island view was stunning. White beaches, blue water, and flora everywhere, creating great shady areas to hang out. It was how she always pictured Hawaii. Even the breeze was perfectly cool, taking away the heated effects of the direct sun and a cloudless sky. "Here we are, Miss Devereaux. I'll inform Maria you've arrived. She'll be up momentarily." He opened the door and stood aside for her to walk in. She thanked him, then closed the door behind her, giving her a chance to check out the room. She knew Adriana Devereaux was as old as her grandmother, so Vivienne was expecting something dated, maybe furniture with flowery material, paneled walls, faded curtains covering every window, and even that smell she'd always associated with older ladies. This was not that. The room was dressed in modern sofas and recliners with straight, clean lines, slick blinds on the windows, and a fireplace with a white shaggy rug on the floor perfect for snuggling by the fire. If she had someone to snuggle with, that was. If it got cold enough to snuggle. Vivienne dropped her bag on the nearest chair and continued through her new abode. Hardwood floors squeaked under her sneakers. Sandals or bare feet would definitely be in order here. A few doors lined the back wall. She opened door number 1. The master bedroom. Again, she was expecting an old bed with a tattered quilt, maybe even a spinning wheel. But the contemporary design was awesome, being done in an all-white theme. The different textures and materials made the room feel cozy, so very unhospital-ish. On a dresser by the door stood a picture of a couple in their mid-30s. She picked it up and studied the faces. The man she'd never seen, but the woman looked like a reflection of herself and seemed full of vitality, life, and happiness. A voice behind her pulled her attention away. "That is Adriana." The previous, there was a pause. "Owner of the island." Startled, Vivienne almost dropped the picture as she whirled around. "Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Devereaux. I didn't mean to frighten you. I'm Maria, here to help you get settled in." "No apology needed. I just didn't hear you come in." Vivienne carefully put the photo back in place. The short woman with black hair pulled into a bun at the nape of her neck hurried toward another door. "I'm Maria. As you see, your room has been updated." She opened the door. "This is the remodeled master bath with new freestanding shower and jet garden tub. The old Miss Devereaux preferred a normal old white tub, but I insisted you have a good one. You will appreciate it, mark my words." Maria's chest puffed out with pride. She beamed a toothy smile. It was hard not to immediately like Maria. Next, Maria pulled open a set of double doors and flipped a light switch. "Here's your closet. We've provided you with outfits, plus some business attire in case you prefer those when working." Vivienne stuck her head in and couldn't believe what she saw. So many clothes, she'd never be able to wear them all. And more shoes than she knew what to do with, lined racks along a narrow section. "Wait a second. How did you know my sizes?" Vivienne asked. "Ah, now," Maria said, smiling mischievously. "The island has its ways. Don't question it." Then it dawned on her that Maria said, "when working," earlier. What did that mean? Did owning mean working? What the hell did she know about running an island? Did one even run an island? This was becoming too much for Vivienne to take in. She needed a moment for her brain to catch up with reality. "Miss Devereaux, you have a rest, then come down to the main building and have dinner when you're ready. I'm sure this has been an exhausting day for you. Call me if you need anything." Maria walked out of the room. Vivienne wondered if that woman could read her mind. If not, she was damned good. After a hot shower and donning fresh clothes, she felt like a new person. Through a set of French doors in the bedroom, she caught a glimpse of the backyard. Pushing the doors open, she stepped out and took a deep breath. The air here was so much better than in New York. She could almost smell the cleanness, the purity. The area in the back was a garden oasis, with potted plants and statue waterfalls. Big colorful blooms sparkled in the sun, drinking in the life-giving warmth. At the far edge, the woods began. A tingle raced down her spine, reacting to something unseen. The forest called to her. But why? She headed down the deck steps. The grass was cool and tickled her bare feet. It was soft enough to roll around in. The wind whispered as she walked under the branches. There were old trees with trunks wide enough to hide behind. Her hand brushed across the ancient bark. How much had these trees seen in their lifetime? Movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. She whipped her head around, but saw nothing other than leaves settling in place. The area grew darker as she went deeper, but she wasn't too concerned. It shouldn't get dark enough to need a flashlight. Not yet, anyway. She kept going, letting the pull of it draw her farther in. The ground was transitioning to rocky from dirt. She must be close to the volcano she saw on the map. Why would she feel drawn to this spot? Standing at the end of the tree line, a rocky slope ascended 1,000,000 feet up. Scanning the surface, she noticed a dark patch. Was that a cave? She just started toward it when a low rumble unsettled the air on her right. She froze. That can't be a vicious animal. Quick would have told her if such a thing existed on the island. And anyway, if there were wild animals, wouldn't there be fences to keep the dangerous creatures out? Despite that thought, which should have been comforting, her heart hammered. Slowly she backed into the trees from where she'd come. Step after step. Twigs snapped in the shadows. She glanced from tree to tree to tree. Something knew she was there and was following her. She was about to be lunch to some deadly, hungry creature. Suddenly black fur flew toward her. She ducked and took off through the woods. Frantic, she searched for familiar sights to guide her back. How stupid was she, wandering through the forest. I'm not Red Frickin' Riding Hood. Behind her, more growls erupted. Much closer than before. The ground shook with the impact of footsteps, and something crashing through the undergrowth. The darkness was thick. No hint of civilization anywhere. She felt a sharp sensation on the back of her calf. She screamed, thinking that might be the last thing she did. And cursed herself at the same moment for having come to the island, for exploring, for not turning around and facing whatever was going to eat her.
Chapter 12. Quick. After a revitalizing run through the jungle, Quick stomped to his office and slammed the door behind him. But it made no sound, no click, no wood-on-wood sounds of a door closing. He whirled around to find out why. Maze had followed him in, and caught it before it could close fully. Maze was the last person Quick wanted to talk to right now. His best friend and second-in-command knew him too well. So, Maze said, "Feel better after your meltdown?" It was not a meltdown. I had something very important to do. Maze snorted. Yeah, taking a run through the forest is always important. Are you here for a reason, Maze? Except to bug me? Yeah. What do you think of the new boss woman? And why doesn't she have any luggage? I thought she was coming to stay. She looks like she packed for a weekend. If that. Maze crossed arms over a broad chest and leaned against the door. Shit. One question at a time. Quick released a long sigh. Maze narrowed his eyes, studying him. You're not still pissed that you couldn't inherit the island, are you? It's not the boss woman's fault. I know, Quick snapped. I'm not pissed. I never was pissed. I just don't want things to change. He sat back in his chair behind his tidy desk and ran a hand through his hair. Sorry, man. You should take some time off, Maze said. You can't work while you grieve. You've put everyone on eggshells. I got this. That sounded logical, but grief wasn't logical. No. I have too much to do with. His tongue stumbled over the words. Miss Devereaux. He'd never thought of anyone else but Adriana by that name. Plus, if he just sat around, he'd think about how much he'd miss the woman who'd pretty much been his mother figure ever since his own mother was killed. No, he couldn't do that. No time for moping. A thought popped into his mind. Maze, how many families are on the island? How many from the village work here? Good part of the population, now. Adriana hired several to staff the east side. Why? Quick shook his head. No reason, really. And then he felt guilty about the bold-faced lie he just told the one person he trusted more than anyone. There was a very good reason why he asked. If Vivianne Devereaux sold the island, his and everyone else's lives would drastically change for the worse. How could she sell it anyway? It's not like she could put it with a realtor. It would have to go to another paranormal. Could a non-Devereaux with magic skills handle the enchantments the island needed? His shoulders slumped with the weight of the responsibility, all these families, all the Devereaux plans. Should he tell Maze about Vivianne Devereaux mentioning selling? If he did, he'd probably cause undue stress on Maze. Quick needed Miss Devereaux to fall in love with Skull Point Cay. To never want to leave or sell. The pressure made his head feel like it was going to explode. He just got here, and already he needed to get out again. Rising, he headed for the door he'd just come through. Maze moved out of his way swiftly, as if knowing his boss had a lot on his mind. Quick slid out the front door. Outside, he noticed Maze had followed him. He was a best friend, a great help, but sometimes he was a complete pain in the ass. Quick could take care of that. He whirled to face Maze. Miss Devereaux needs an escort. Handle that. Maze smiled. That wasn't a request, was it? You bet your ass it wasn't. A panicked scream split the island's serene environment. It came from the trees behind the building. They both took off in a sprint toward the sound. Reaching the trees, they didn't know which direction to go. Quick pointed Maze to the right while he went left. Who the hell had just screamed? Coming around a big tree, a body slammed into him, nearly knocking him to the ground. Before him, splayed out on the forest floor, Vivianne Devereaux looked up with frantic eyes. She scrambled to her feet and made to go around him. There's a wild animal chasing me. Run. Unlikely, he thought, but said nothing. The only animals, of any size on the island to speak of, were shifters. Quick jumped to grab her arms to keep her from running off. Lady, it's all right. She flailed and thrashed. Hey. He wrapped his arms around her to stop her wildness. Miss Devereaux. She stilled, each heaving breath pressing her body against his. Quick. She gasped a breath. Animal. Another breath, then deadly. He looked behind her. There isn't anything behind you. She whirled around, looking, searching. But I heard it growl, and I assure you, there are not any wild animals on the island. We would never allow that. She pulled away from him, leaned against a tree, and wiped her forehead with her hand. I swear something was after me. I felt it. No, Miss Devereaux. No such thing. Not on Skull Point. Vivianne. Call me Vivianne. Vivianne, it's lunchtime. Let's go. Her face was red with the exertion, but beneath it, she'd paled with fear. But he motioned her in the direction of the buildings. His nose lifted into the air, smelling for another shifter. She was right, a shifter was nearby. And it wasn't the scent of one he immediately recognized. Damn it. They'd never had a problem with any of the locals. What the hell was going on? He needed to talk with the village leaders to see if they knew anything. But now, he had to escort this woman to the restaurant. A woman who infuriated him, while at the same time attracted him. He whistled, sending a signal to Maze that all was okay. Then a thought dawned on him. What if she hated shifters? Witches and shifters notoriously did not get along. Hell. This would be a fine mess.
Chapter 13. Vivianne. Vivianne was so pissed she could spit nails. Long, deadly steel nails, and right at the man walking beside her. He looked at her like she was a petulant child, complaining over trivial matters. Her life was not a trivial matter. An animal had been chasing her in the woods. She looked down at her leg and saw nothing where she could have sworn something had nipped or clawed at her, but there was nothing where she'd felt the sharp sting. Maybe her senses might have played tricks on her and blown it out of proportion. There was no way they would have deadly animals running freely on the island. Was there? It was a magic island after all. She should find out more about it. Except, she had no desire to engage in a conversation with Quick. She followed him across the neatly maintained grounds, glancing around, lagging a bit behind while she checked the area out. The place was stunning, with beautiful beaches and clear water. Cabanas scattered the area, even a swim-up bar in the pool. She really could get used to living here. She laughed at herself. Of course she could. The attorneys said she owned it, that the island had its own trust fund. What does that really mean, though? Her stomach growled. She ignored it while she surveyed the expanse. Quick stopped suddenly and turned to her. He let out a deep breath. Expressions traveled over his face. She couldn't get a read on them. Was he angry with her? She didn't do anything to him, so she didn't understand what was wrong. Then he spun around and continued on. Wait. She jogged to catch up with him. What was that all about? He didn't answer immediately, but finally said, nothing. Nothing, my foot. But she wasn't getting into it with him. He didn't like her, and she didn't want to push him. They approached an open-air area with tables and chairs. Large bamboo fans hung from a peaked roofline gently moved a breeze over them. This is nice. I'm starving, she said. He grunted and pulled out a chair for her at a table. Great. She had a chivalrous Neanderthal as a companion. After they ordered from the dinner menu, Quick sat back in his chair. We need to discuss operations and how you want to do things. She raised a brow. What do you mean, how I want to do things? His arms crossed over his chest, making his biceps bulge. His shirt stretched over his wide shoulders, pulling tightly across his pecs. His eyes narrowed. Never mind. Tell me about you. She wasn't about to tell him about her or her life. The second she did, he'd take her back to the lawyers and say she wasn't fit to be the heir. Then she'd be back on the street with Ricardo hunting her down. Quick, what the hell is going on? You're fidgety and angry. If there is something you have to say, say it. His hands set on the table again. How much do you know about this island? She shrugged. It's a nice island that my great-aunt owned. That's about it. Did you know Adriana? No, she sighed. I didn't even know she existed. As far as I knew, I had no family left alive. You don't have any family? I'd rather not talk about it. Finding out about Adriana was a total surprise. You do know you are here to replace her in every facet, right? What does that mean? What all did she do? She ran this place, kept the island safe. She provided whatever was needed. Needed? Like what? She changed people, made their lives better. Oh great. She changed them how? You need to explain that, quick. What did she do to people? He growled and ran his hands through his hair. That's not what I meant. He rose to his feet, his chair scooting back several inches in the process. I said that wrong. He paced back and forth. I don't know how to explain it. She just made things right. Great. And I have a habit of making things very wrong. She couldn't afford to lose this place and end up with Ricardo on her heels again. I can try to do that. His tense body relaxed and he let out a rush of air. Lunch was served. The meal was delicious, baked fish with a vegetable medley and spinach sautéed in olive oil. After a few quiet minutes, Quick looked at her. Tomorrow, we'll take a look at the books and I'll show you how everything is set up. What books? He gave her a quizzical look. The accounting ledgers, cash flow, you know. Her eyes widened. Whoa there. I don't know anything about any of that. Like I went to school for accounting. Or school at all. That's part of running the island. You have to learn it. The sooner, the better. He didn't look happy, and was getting snippy again. Look, Quick, she replied, I didn't come here to run a business. Then why did you come? She looked away. She felt like shit now. This place, these people, they all depended on her aunt, and now on her, for their living, to support their families. What was she going to do? She glanced at him, her gaze appraising. Do you know how to run the place? How long have you been here? His face hardened. The asshole part was re-emerging. I've been here most my life. Adriana taught me everything. If it wasn't for magic, this place would probably be in my care. For the second time, she was caught off guard. Magic? Magic again. Magic is everything. If you knew anything about that did it. That was the wrong thing for him to say. Now she was peeved. She put her fork down firmly. You don't know jack about me or my life. You have no idea what I've been through. And for your information, I don't do magic. Not anymore. Magic is no longer a part of my life. Appetite gone, she was done eating, so she had no reason to stay, and she didn't. Just outside of the restaurant, she turned back to find a stunned Quick following her. Since you know how to run everything, then please do. And don't worry. I won't mooch off my aunt's hard work. I'll be leaving the island tomorrow, so you can have it all to yourself. Tears threatened while she power walked away. Vivienne. Leave me alone. She'd take care of herself like she had the past several years. She didn't need anybody, especially some male who was too good-looking for his own good. She'd leave tomorrow the same way she arrived, with nothing. Chapter 14. Vivienne. Vivienne followed the crushed rock path through the trees, toward what she hoped was her bungalow. She was angry, ashamed, and had no idea where she was going. But she knew she had no business owning an island. The infuriating and gorgeous man behind her was catching up. There was nothing she had to say to him. She meant it when she said she'd leave in the morning. Hell, she could leave right now. She was pretty close to Galveston. Her parents used to have a weekend home in the oceanside town. It wasn't as nice as Destin, but it had the essentials of beach and water. She could hide out there and find work. In the woods to her right, the sound of someone or something approaching stopped her in her tracks. Was it the same creature that chased her earlier, back to finish her off? She froze for a second. Relax, Miss Devereaux, it's one of the residents, Quick said from behind her. Through the bushes, a middle-aged woman stepped onto the trail. Mr. Quick, she said with quiver to her voice, do you have a moment? She wrung her hands together. Vivienne knew something was wrong. Something inside Vivienne was desperate to help her. To make everything all right again. He does, and so do I, Vivienne said quickly. What do you need? The woman stared at her for a moment, then broke into a smile. You look like your aunt. Welcome to the island. Her eyes darted between Vivienne and Quick. Vivienne felt the uncertainty and fear rolling off of her. And she wasn't even touching the lady at all. In fact, several feet separated them. My son Tico. He hasn't contacted me in several days. More hand-wringing accompanied her words. Quick frowned. He's in college, right? She nodded. Quick laid a hand on her shoulder. I'm sure he's fine, Sheila. He's probably busy with schoolwork and just forgot. No, Mr. Quick. Something is wrong. I know it. Have you tried to contact him? Vivienne asked. Sheila nodded. Yes. Several times. He hasn't replied in a couple days. That is not like him. Quick asked what you like me to do. Please check on him, she pleaded. Quick jerked back a bit, surprise on his face, and just as quickly it was gone. He's going to school in Texas? He asked. She nodded, her eyes becoming glassy. And I was just thinking about Texas. Vivienne had to ask. Galveston by chance? He's studying to be a marine biologist at A&M, Sheila said. Vivienne knew this was no coincidence. Just like all the clues that led her to the attorneys weren't coincidences. I've been to Galveston, Vivienne said. We'll figure out what's going on with your son, Sheila. Quick's brow went up. Will, he mouthed. Thank you so much, Sheila said, sniffling. Quick squeezed her shoulder. Go on home. We'll let you know as soon as we can. She nodded her thanks and disappeared among the trees. Quick smirked at Vivienne. She spun on her heel as she said, Don't say one word. She hated when she was wrong. Despite everything she'd said about leaving, she was determined to help this woman however she could. So, the man behind her said, Changed your mind about leaving tomorrow? Vivienne heard the humor in his voice and lifted her chin. I have, she said. I'm leaving in 15 minutes. What? Quick griped. How could? And you're coming with me, Mr. Quick, she finished. He didn't say anything after that. Good. In her bungalow, she stood in the closet and took in its contents. After pulling a bag from a shelf, she filled it with a change of clothes. It would probably make more sense to start this venture early tomorrow morning, but she itched to get going. She didn't want to sit around the rest of the day worrying. She had to do something now. Besides, it was early in the afternoon. How long could this take? The kid probably drank too much and was sick for a couple days and didn't want his mom to figure it out. They would be there and back by bedtime. Walking down the wood-slatted pier, she saw Quick and a few others already at the boat, getting it ready to leave. One of the men assisted her into the boat. She tossed her bag on the floor toward the back alongside a black bag she guessed was Quick's. Quick stepped on deck. You know, he said, it's a 6-hour drive to Galveston from here. I know, she said, but we're not driving. Quick froze. What do you mean, we're not driving? You got a broom we're going to fly on? Really, Quick? Vivienne rolled her eyes. Are these the Middle Ages? No. Then what's the plan, he asked, irritation showing through. Obviously, my aunt never took you anywhere except New Orleans, she said. We're taking the portal to Galveston. He looked at her. The portal? You can do that? She hated the idea of using magic, but nothing was stopping her from helping those on the island. Yes? She pulled out the chant sheet from the packet the attorneys gave her. It had the words for many port destinations, several in Florida, a few in Texas, even some along the Mexican shoreline. They'd be there in no time, and she'd get this taken care of. As long as nothing went wrong.
Chapter 15. Quick. Quick stared at Vivienne from behind the boat's wheel. His first thoughts about this new heiress had been very wrong. He was sure Vivienne would cut and run as soon as things got hard. When Sheila approached them, he was surprised Vivienne stopped, and even more surprised by her willingness to help. His shifter senses picked up on her concern for a woman she didn't know. When Vivienne said wheel, he was shocked. Maybe she wasn't the kind of person he thought she was. Then when Vivienne took control of the situation, plan clearly already in mind, it felt like he was back with Adriana. They were on a mission to help someone who had no one else to go to. But when she said they were leaving in 15 minutes, he wondered about her sanity. He wondered how many plans she'd made in her experience. Could 0 be right? Didn't matter. He was there to back her up and make sure she was safe, whatever she had planned or not planned. Besides, it was just Tico at school. He'd always been a good kid. Always willing to help out when needed. Followed the rules as well as kids could. And respected his elders. His mom brought him up right. This excursion should be a quick there and back, except for the drive he'd been dreading. 6 hours in an SUV with this woman would either be good or really, really bad. But that didn't matter now that he'd learned something he'd never known. More than one portal existed. That had him wondering how the magic on the island worked. Adriana had said the island and its surroundings were in a different dimension. What dimension and where it was located had never been any of his concern. He completely trusted Adriana. He never questioned her magic. As a shifter, he couldn't wield or control it. His job was to make sure everyone remained safe. No questions asked. Maybe it was time he took responsibility for the world around him, not just the few things in his comfort zone. That started with helping Vivienne instead of fighting her. He wasn't sure if that was possible. She forced so many of his emotions to the surface, he couldn't control them. His cool, calm composure he was known for went right out the window when she was close. "So then," he said, "you know how to work these portals to get Galveston? Should be a piece of cake." Her grin didn't relieve his worry. Should be. There was so much that could go wrong with those two words. "Okay, let's get going." He started up the boat's engine and pulled away from the dock. He watched her studying a sheet of paper as they progressed toward the fog. She said she didn't do magic anymore. He wondered what made her change her mind. It had to be important, whatever it was. He slowed, approaching the dimensions transition area. "You ready?" Saying nothing, she twisted in her seat to face the water. Her lips moved as if speaking to herself, but his wolf ears picked up each word. Sounded almost like the chant used for New Orleans. He felt the same pull he normally did, and got the boat moving into the fog. The scenery was different than the usual sights. Quick looked around the harbor before them, searching for a place to dock the boat. He headed toward a uniformed guy. When the man noticed them, he waved them over. "Good afternoon, folks. I didn't hear you come in. Y'all needing a place to dock for a bit?" "Yes," Quick shouted. "Got some business to take care of on the island. Be gone by this evening." The man pointed to a pier with empty slots. "Tie up there and go on up to the office to square things away." "Thanks." Quick headed in that direction. After filling out the paperwork, he and Vivienne stood outside in the brilliant sunshine. The pier was a nice place. A lot of boats ranging from a simple flat bottom to extravagant yachts. Usually the dock was quiet in New Orleans when they arrived at various times of the day or night. Here, people walked the concrete walkways carrying various supplies and food for on the water. A small but clean car pulled around the corner and stopped in front of them. When the window slid down, Vivienne stepped up to the car. "You are a cab driver?" she asked. "I am," the young man said. "Going to the university?" "Yes." Vivienne nodded. "Hop on in." The kid pointed a thumb over his shoulder. Quick wasn't thrilled with this new form of transportation. They had a vehicle of their own at the other dock, and he much preferred being in control of where they were going. But that wasn't an option here, as Vivienne had reminded him when she scheduled the pickup. Quick held the door for her to climb into the back, then got in the front, smiling at the driver as his big frame squeezed into the seat. The smile was more warning than friendly. "I'll ride up here with you," Quick said. "If that's all right." "Sure," the kid squeaked, fighting to smile back. "Whatever you want, sir." Quick was just starting to enjoy the kid's apprehension when Vivienne smacked him on the shoulder. He partially turned toward her to see a frown on her face directed at him. "What?" he mouthed. She grumbled quietly for only his ears only, "You know what?" And she smiled at the driver. "Just ignore Quick," she said. "He's all bark, no bite." The driver forced a laugh and squealed his tires getting them on the road. While Vivienne and the driver chatted, Quick noticed how nice the island was. Palm trees dotted the area with old but well-kept buildings lining the street. People roamed the sidewalks along the storefronts and sat in the grass in small parks. Within very little time, they arrived at a building surrounded by college students. "This is the dorm you requested," the driver said. Quick and Vivienne headed for the main entrance, slipped in as a student was exiting, bypassing the attendant at the desk who was more interested in some app on her phone. They took the elevator to the 4th floor. Knocking on the door to Tico's room, he hoped this was the right room. "Come in." "Door's open," came from the other side. Quick opened the door to find a young man sitting on a bed with a book propped on his knees. He jolted to his feet as soon as he saw them. Vivienne stepped forward with a smile. "Hi. We're looking for Tico. His mom's worried about him." He set the book on a cluttered desk. "Oh yeah. So are we. Please come in. Quick followed Vivienne inside and closed the door. When was the last time you saw him? Vivienne asked. It's been a couple days. As the two talked, Quick looked around the room. On the other bed were some clothes and a pair of socks. He wandered to the other desk and flipped through a couple textbooks, then picked up a spiral-bound notebook. Turning to the back pages, Quick noticed handwritten notes in tiny script, clear and legible. The next page held a completely different style of writing. Odd. Big letters spelled poison and toxic, among other scrawled words. That was the last entry in the notebook. He flipped it shut and tuned back into the conversation. Professor Santoli is in the Marine building, the roommate was saying. It's not far from here. Just follow the sidewalk out front toward the island's end. You'll see it. Thank you, Brad, Vivienne said. We'll let you know if we find anything. Thank you, Miss Devereaux. Brad shook her hand. Vivienne stiffened slightly. Quick wondered what that was about. Brad was picking the book back up. A lot of us are concerned about him. This isn't like him. No doubt. Quick smiled his thanks, then with his hand on the small of Vivienne's back, and he her into the hallway and closed the door. You okay? Quick stopped a few paces down the empty, silent hallway. Yeah, fine, she replied. Brad is a good man. Good parenting. A true friend. You got all that from talking to him? Her brow went up. Kinda. No kidding. There was a lot he had yet to learn about this woman. We going to the Marine building Brad mentioned? He asked. Vivienne shrugged. He said they'd already gone to campus police, and talking to his professor was the only other thing he could think of if we wanted to know what Tico was working on. Quick nodded. Sounded like as good a move as any. The smell of salt in the air amplified the farther they walked. The seagulls circled and cried nearby. On the left, the Moody School of Marine Studies stood out among the older buildings around it. Inside, they found an office with Professor Santoli's name on the door. One knock later, and they were invited in the door. Professor Santoli, Quick took charge. Do you have a moment to speak with us concerning one of your students? Absolutely. Please come in. Professor Santoli closed the laptop screen and turned to his desk. Tico, by chance? Vivienne caught Quick's eye. Yes, said Quick. How do you know? He's missed lab the last couple days. That's not like him. That was the third time Quick had heard that phrase associated with Tico. Obviously, he was predictable and level-headed. That was the Tico he remembered. Vivienne asked, was Tico working on anything specific? All my students have projects for the semester, the professor replied. He turned to his computer and brought up a spreadsheet of names. Let's see. Tico's project is to analyze various locations in the bay to see what differences affect spawning. How far along was he in the project? Quick asked. The professor clicked through some screens. According to his plan outline, he should have gotten back his first results from testing a few days ago. We had a meeting scheduled yesterday, which he didn't show up for. Do you have the results of the test? Quick asked. No. Tico was to bring that with him. We were to discuss the findings and make plans for next semester. Professor Santoli. Quick leaned forward. In a notebook in Tico's dorm room, I saw the words poison and on the last page. Could that apply to the results? Could he have found something that got him into trouble? The university instructor frowned and clicked through more screens, then picked up the phone. A few button punches, and seconds later, he was immersed in a conversation that seemed to be with a company that processed Tico samples. When the Santoli hung up, he released a deep sigh. I know the CEO of the lab we use for testing. He agreed to have the results emailed to me shortly. Thing is, he can't give us a reading. I'll have to go through it and find answers. Will that take long? Vivienne asked. Shouldn't, he replied. I need to see what was tested for and its results. Quick frown. Wouldn't water be the most obvious choice for poison and toxic substances? Yes, but soil and mud conditions could have the same attributes. Mud could make water toxic, and water can do the same to mud. I just need to see what the samples consisted of. There was a beep from his computer, and Santoli brought up the university's email system. He clicked a link, and an image came up. "Fabulous," he said. "This is exactly what we need." After a few seconds of silent reading, Santoli rose and pulled a worn book from a shelf. Back at the desk, he flipped through pages to the index and ran his finger down a column of numbers. "It looks like these are basic water samples, tested for various chemical levels. They're all close except these two. And of the two, one is off the charts high. Could that be what Tico's referring to?" Quick asked. "One of the test areas was highly contaminated?" "Very possibly," the professor replied almost absent-mindedly. He scrolled through page after page, often referring to the chemical report and Tico's submitted work plan. He finally concluded, "I think I have the GPS locations of the samples, but I can't match the sample with the result by the little info I have here." "What next then?" Vivienne asked. "Well," the teacher tapped his chin, thinking, "you could rummage through all Tico's research to see if you can find where he prepared the samples." That sounded extremely tedious and a shot in the dark to Quick. "Or," the professor continued, "you could go to these coordinates and do a simple strip test to find the two that are unusually high. You'd need a boat for that, more than likely." "We have one," Vivienne said, almost excited. Santoli printed out a sheet and highlighted the GPS coordinates. "Here is what I have for the sample sites." Tico could have changed them after he turned in this part of the assignment, but maybe not. He looked at his watch. "I'd like to go with you, but my next class starts in 15 minutes. Santoli went to a cabinet and opened the door. He pulled out a plastic container and brought it back to the desk. "Here are some test strips that will give you the information you need. They are similar to the ones used to test pool water." He flipped the box over to the back where rows of colors lined along numbers. "These numbers show the chemical level of the water, according to the darkness or lightness of the color swab on the strip. Just match them up to get an idea." That looked easy to Quick. Match the colors and see if they were in the low, normal, or high range. "My class will be over in 90 minutes. Bring back your results, and we'll see where we go from there. I'll wait for you here if it gets late." He grimaced. "Depending on your results, we may need to go to the local police." Quick gave him a nod and shook his hand again, while Vivienne kept hers clasped in front of her. "Thank you for your help, Professor," she said. "We'll see you shortly." Once again standing outside waiting for their cab driver, Quick thought about the woman next to him. She was more than eager to help, to the point she performed magic which she pretty much refused to earlier. So her heart was in the right place. But what about the physical contact? Was she one of those germaphobes who wouldn't touch things? That ought to be fun. "I've noticed you have a thing about," how should he phrase it so not to piss her off? "Keeping my hands off people," she finished for him. "Yeah. That," he said. "May I ask why?" Vivienne smiled at him. Smiled. That was a huge change from before when she'd cussed him out. She looked beautiful with the sun streaming through her hair. "I guess Wits and Wiz didn't tell you much about me," she asked. "They told me nothing," he said. "Just that I needed to come get you." "Oh," she replied. "That's about the same amount I know about you." Their cab circled the drive to the front of the building.
Chapter 16. Vivienne. Vivienne looked over the GPS coordinates on the paper Professor Santoli had given them and typed them into Quick's phone while he prepared the boat for launch. The professor was clearly cared for his students. She got that feeling from the man right away. And the way he helped them get answers and information, they probably shouldn't have told her he wanted to know what happened to his student. She wasn't sure what good finding the two toxic places would do, but it was the only thing they knew about Tico that was somewhat recent. His roommate at the dorm had been charming, but not much help. The vibes she got from him were confirmed when she shook his hand at the end of their conversation. And he was not being deceptive. "You ready?" Quick called from the front of the boat. "Yeah, whenever you are." Quick stepped behind the driving console and started up the boat. Slowly he backed out of the slip. He was very careful. Always careful, she noted. He had a way about him that was caring, though she wasn't telling him that. He'd probably growl at her for hinting he was soft. When they were talking with Sheila outside the island restaurant, she'd seen a side of him she didn't think existed. He wasn't rough and gruff the way he'd originally come off. He seemed to know about her life and her son's life. Did he know about that kind of information for everyone on the island? Was she supposed to know that too? That would take her forever to memorize so much. Perhaps with time all that would come. She paused mentally. Whoa. Did this mean she was staying on the island and keeping it? Luckily, Quick's next question pulled her from her train of thought. "You got the first location figured?" Quick asked, bringing her out of her reverie. She lifted the phone and looked at the screen. "Yeah. I downloaded an app that would give us a map of where we were in relation to the spot. I guess we just go to where it says." "An app, you say?" Quick commented. "Yes. An app." She wondered. "Quick, how old are you?" "Why?" he huffed, sounding offended. "You seem to be a little behind on technology," she said. "You've been living under a rock?" Quick laughed. "Actually, on a rock." Vivienne was caught off guard with his joke and laughed along with him. Maybe he wasn't as bad as she initially thought. "Nah," Quick said. "I came to the island when I was a kid. I don't care much for people or the mainland, so I didn't keep up with technology. As long as people didn't bother me, I didn't bother them." "How do you have a mobile phone then?" she asked. "Adriana wanted me to have one whenever I went to shore, in case I needed to call someone. Like I knew anyone I wanted to call." He snorted. "I noticed you don't have one. How do you know all about this stuff?" She shrugged. "Just do. That came down to simple economics. No money." The phone in her hand beeped. She looked down to see the two dots almost on top of each other. This must be it. Getting to her feet, she showed the phone screen to Quick. He puttered the boat a bit toward the shoreline. They were in the bay, but the place seemed huge to her. Big enough to where she wasn't comfortable. Open water. Quick pulled a rope from under the bench seat along with a plastic mug. He tied the rope around the handle and lowered it over the side. "That's smart," she said. She hadn't thought about how they were going to get the water to test. "You're a handy person to have around, Quick. Anything Adriana wanted, I figured a way to make it happen." The way he spoke when talking about her great-aunt showed how much he'd loved her. One of the lawyers had told her Quick was adopted by Adriana. She wondered what happened to his real parents. Were they dead like hers were, murdered like hers? No. She wasn't going there, right now. She was on a mission. Quick set the mug on the seat, and Vivienne pulled out a test strip from the round container. She read the directions out loud, and he dipped the swabs attached to the paper into the water and gave it one shake after lifting it out. He stood beside her, holding the strip close to the diagram so they could compare the colored results to the chart. He thrust the test strip at her. "Here. What does it say?" She took it from his fingers, careful not to touch him, and compared the colors. "They look normal to me. Nothing too much either way." "Good," Quick said and stepped behind the boat. "Let's go to another spot." The next number she entered took them across to the entrance of the bay on the far side. As Quick motored them in that direction, she took in the buildings and factory that came into view as they got closer. She'd never seen a big oil and gas plant up close. There were a lot of them between New Orleans and here, but she'd always been on the road driving past, not floating in the facility's backyards. When they approached the GPS location, she saw the chain-link fence surrounding the plant a few hundred feet from the water. Everything in the plant was shiny and looked new. She wondered how long it had been there. She didn't remember it from her days in Galveston, but she never ventured to this part of the island since it was so far from their beach home. They stopped a couple yards from the shore at the edge of the bay, right where it opened to meet the Gulf waters. Quick had to set the anchor to keep the boat from floating out with the current there. When set, he lowered the mug overboard, scooped up water and hauled it in. She pulled the strip for him and he dipped it. This time he held on to it and hovered it over the color chart. Surprisingly, none of the colors were even close to being right. Some were totally different almost. "What the hell?" Quick said. "Did we do something wrong?" "Dump the water and we'll try again," she said. That was the only thing she could think. Something was off. Second try returned same results. "Let's go farther in along the shoreline and try," she said. "Maybe the water closer to the ocean is different than the bay." "Could be the place of that test that was off the charts," Quick said. "Could be, but the colors are so wrong," she replied. Quick moved them a good distance back into the bay, stopping on the other side of an oil facility. They were far enough in that they didn't need the anchor this time. That made things go faster. Test results registered a bit higher than the first, but still in the normal range. Quick looked up and down the shoreline. "Something between here and the open water is making the test spike." "You think that's it?" she asked. There was nothing there but grass, rocks and mud. "What though?" Quick stepped behind the steering wheel. "I have no clue." They puttered up the side toward the open ocean about 50 feet and tested again. Results were about the same. As they moved closer to the open water, Vivienne stared at the land between the plant and them. There was a wide and long area of grass that extended to the fence at the end of the property. Seemed like a lot of waste to her. A small park could go there instead of empty weeds. Chugging past the land, she noticed a strip of grass was different than the rest. It was drier and looked a bit dead compared to the other weeds. The strip seemed to dive under the fence. The far side ended at the plant somewhere by the asphalt. She couldn't see that far. Several feet past the line of grass, Quick brought them to a stop. They were pretty close to the end, but still in bay waters. She handed him the empty mug and pulled out a strip. Vivienne groaned at getting the same wonky colors as the other test. So something between here and the spot was different. The place on the other side of that different grass. Like a lightning bolt, the answer hit her. "Oh shit, Quick. There's an underground pipe from the factory dumping stuff into the water." He looked at her, brows drawn. "How do you get that?" She pointed to the long, grassy knoll. "That grass there is different on both sides of the hump, as if someone dug a trench, dropped a pipe in, refilled the hole, and put patches of grass over the dirt to hide it. The grass is looking dead because it hasn't rooted enough to take water from the ground." "Well, I'll be damned," Quick replied. "That's sound reasoning." He poured the mug water overboard. "Let's check the water closer to the pipe on both sides, just to confirm." As suspected, the chemical content of the water was high up current from the pipe and off the charts down current. Vivienne plopped down on the cushioned seat. How are they getting away with this? Doesn't the EPA or someone monitor this kind of thing? You'd think so, but I have no idea. He studied the bankside distances they had traveled in the last half hour. Seems they test either farther into the bay or out in the ocean. By placing the dump site here, none of it goes into the bay, and it dissipates too much for testing before it gets too far out. What do we do? She sensed anger building in Quick. He turned the boat around. I say we confront these bastards and shut them down right now. Was he crazy? Maybe we should call in the police or something? He turned steely eyes to her. The police? Are you serious? All they do is arrest the innocent and throw them in jail to be prosecuted by twisted lawyers. Anyone with money can buy their way through the system. None of them can be trusted. Whoa. She didn't expect that kind of reaction from him. That sounded like personal experience. Quick clenched his jaw. We do this on our own. Her eyes grew large. Do what on our own? Take them down.
Chapter 17. Quick. Quick wondered who the hell the corporate billionaire who thought he was above the law was. He clearly thought he could poison the Earth's water and sea life and get away with it. Who the hell did he think he was? Well, by damn, Quick was about to show him the light. You know this isn't a good idea. Vivienne tried to keep up with him. You have to be calm and not overreact to things like this. He spun on her. Not overreact. Whoever runs this place knows exactly what's going on, and they don't intend to stop. Who knows how long it's been going on? How many people are in his pocket? How much irrevocable damage has already been done? I get it. But trespassing is against the law, Vivienne pleaded. We're not trespassing. We aren't exactly invited guests either. Quick turned to her again. Look, I appreciate you wanting to help Sheila find her son, but at this moment, this has to be taken care of. How about you go back to the boat and wait for me? Be careful climbing the fence. She crossed her arms over her chest. If that wasn't a go-to-hell look, he didn't know what was. He raised his hands. Fine then. If you're staying with me, then don't get in the way. Get in the way. Maybe he shouldn't have put it quite that way. She snorted. I'll probably end up saving your stupid ass. Let's go. She whipped a finger out and waved him on. Save his ass. Whatever. Finally reaching civilization from their hike through the field, Quick flagged down a man in a blue zipper jumpsuit with Ted embroidered on the chest pocket. Can I help you? Ted asked. Yes, sir. Thank you, Quick said. I just got hired, and I'm looking for the HR department. I need to fill out paperwork, and my wife here got me all lost. He felt a finger jab his back. Yeah. He knew he hadn't heard the last of that. Ted pointed him toward a 3-story building on the other side of the parking lot. One more thing, sir, if I may, Quick said. Is Whitninghouse the head guy here? Oh, no, Ted said. Tex Wolf is. Been here since day one. Oh, Quick feigned surprise. I got my research wrong. Thanks. I could have made a fool of myself. No problem, man, Ted waved. Good luck. Yeah, Quick said. I might need it. Vivienne poked him again in the same spot. Ow, woman. You've got one hell of a finger jab. Reaching the building Ted directed them to, Quick held the door for Vivienne to walk in. Since it was the middle of the afternoon, he hoped Tex was still in his office and hadn't left for home already. May I help you? The receptionist asked. He inhaled and picked up her scent. She was Wolf Shifter. That caught him off guard. He maintained his composure and didn't let his surprise show. After a second, her brow raised, informing Quick that she knew what he was. He gave her a grim smile. We're here to speak with Tex. We're his next appointment. He glanced at his watch to make it look good. A bit early, but we can wait. The receptionist picked up the phone. I'll let Mr. Wolf know you're here. He and Vivienne walked toward the chairs when he overheard the conversation on the phone between the shifter receptionist and who he presumed was Mr. Wolf. But sir, he's one of us. The receptionist hung up. Mr. Wolf will see you know. His office is the top floor. Quick plastered on a smile and turned. Thank you. Vivienne straightened her top. The girl said his office was on the top floor. No, he said, as the elevator doors opened to reveal an incredible expanse before them. She said his office was the top floor. Vivienne and he stood in the elevator, staring at the fabulous sight, one that could have been in a designer's magazine. The main attractions were the 2 walls made of glass, overlooking the bay and ocean. Come in, a man's voice said. What do I owe for this visit from a fellow wolf? Vivienne did a double take at Quick with a confused expression. It was then it dawned on him that she really didn't know he was a shifter. This was not a good time or place for that truth to come to light.
Chapter 18. Vivienne. Fellow wolf? Vivienne thought. What did that mean? Were they related? Quick's last name was Alvarez, so maybe on his mother's side? When Quick glanced at her with concerned eyes, she mouthed what? He shook his head and stepped out of the elevator into the magnificent room. She followed Quick to the side of the room where Mr. Wolf's desk sat with a large, suited man behind it. The nameplate on his desktop spelled his name Wolf. Was that a joke? She'd have thought it was spelled Wolf. Mr. Wolf, Quick said. Wolf took a deep breath and offered his hand, which Quick shook. My name is Quick Alvarez, and this is my assistant Vivienne. When Wolf went to shake Vivienne's hand, she took a step back and smiled. I'm a germaphobe, she joked. Mr. Wolf lifted a brow but did not take his eyes off her. Welcome to my office, Mr. Alvarez, Miss Vivienne. What can I do for you? Wolf gestured for them to sit as plush chairs in front of the desk. Vivienne was still worried what Quick would say. She didn't want any confrontation here, especially one that might end in someone calling 911. After sitting, she glanced at Quick. He was smiling, but his emotion was heavy with anger. She marveled at how her senses had improved since this morning. What was going on with her witch skills? Why was she sensing things so intensely? Mr. Wolf, Quick said, there's no need for us to bullshit each other. We both know if we are lying. She cringed at the lack of social niceties. Someone needed to teach some to Quick, just so he didn't come across as such a Neanderthal. Okay, Mr. Alvarez. Out with it then, Wolf snapped. I haven't got all day to talk to strangers who randomly show up at my office. Whoa shit. Where did that attitude come from? She sensed Quick's anger shooting off the scale, but he didn't launch himself at the man. That was good at least. Your company is dumping toxic waste into the bay and ocean, and it must stop. Mr. Wolf sat back in his executive leather chair. That's a very serious accusation, Mr. Alvarez. We could be fined millions of dollars and even face jail time. Why would we risk so much? I don't know, Quick said. You tell me. His knuckles turned white, gripping the chair's arms. Mr. Wolf, she cut in, tests have shown the water behind your plant is off the chart with toxin levels. We're hoping you would work with us to find the cause and help put a stop to it. That, Wolf said, is something I'd absolutely help with. If something is leaking or broken, we need to know and fix it immediately. Vivienne let out a breath and relaxed. Quick remained stoic, watching the man. Wolf picked up the phone. Marcy, have the plant manager on duty meet me at entrance 1 immediately. He hung up and turned to Vivienne. Let's talk with the manager to see what could possibly be wrong. Maybe give you a tour of the facility. Perhaps that will bring something to light. Wolf looked at his watch. I need to cancel my 4 o'clock. You two can go on down to meet the manager and get things started. I'll be down shortly. The receptionist downstairs will show you where to go. He rose and walked around his desk. I assure you, Mr. Alvarez, this will be taken care of immediately, and I appreciate your concern. Wolf guided them to the elevator and pushed the button for them. As they stepped inside the elevator, he added, be sure they give you a hard hat before going anywhere. We always put safety first here. The doors closed and he was gone. Vivienne pushed the button for the first floor and sighed. That went better than I expected. What do you think? He's got to be lying. Something's not right. Quick paced the small interior. Quick. She grabbed his sleeve. I agree something is going on here, but we need more information before we can do anything. No federal agency will respond to two normal people who say something is wrong, but don't know what. Yeah, fine, he said. When you put it that way, it does sound lame. Exactly, she continued. Since they are willing to help, let's use this to its full advantage and see what all we can find. If they so much as threaten us. With what, Quick? They don't have anything to threaten us about. Just be ready in case something does happen. The doors opened and she let out a long breath. This could go either way. She hoped the company was innocent of foul play, and this would all be over so they could get back to looking for Tico.
Chapter 19. Quick. Quick didn't like this one bit. Wolf was crooked. Quick had always had good instincts about people, and his gut was telling him this guy stunk more than meat rotting in the sun. But as far as he could tell, the man hadn't lied about anything in the office, but he never flat out said he was innocent of wrongdoing. Vivienne was right. They needed to take this opportunity to find out what they could, and go from there. After this tour of the plant, they'd get back to the professor and inform him of their find and see what he suggested. Quick definitely wasn't made for this kind of detective work. He was better at the physical aspects of security, like stopping fights and making sure their island was safe from intruders. The wolf receptionist pointed them in the direction of the plant door, marked with a large number 1. As they stepped inside, the light dimmed dramatically from bright sun to overhead fluorescence. His eyes adjusted quickly with help from his inner animal. He took in a deep breath and scoped the area, looking for anything that was out of place. Not that he'd know what was out of place in an oil factory. Nothing set off his internal alarms, so he dialed down the adrenaline and lowered it to DEFCON 4. A man in a blue jumpsuit identical to Ted's made his way toward them. He wore clear safety goggles and a scuffed hard hat. The name on his chest read Brad with Operations Manager underneath. He looked harmless enough. Quick knew he could take him. Brad reached out to shake hands with him. Quick did the same. "You two the ones Mr. Wolf sent over for the tour?" "Yes," Quick said. "He said get started and he'd be over shortly." Brad took a hard hat from the wall and passed it to Vivienne, then another hat to him. "Need to have these on at all times. Safety is first around here." Sounded familiar, he thought. Was it really true? "Follow me. I'll show you where this whole process starts," Brad quipped as he headed away. "Actually," Quick said, "can we start where the toxic chemicals are extracted and stored?" Brad stopped and drew his brows down. Sure. That would be at the back. Give me a second to call Marcy." He picked up the phone receiver hanging on the wall. "Marcy, this is Brad with our guests. We're starting in the back with the chemicals. Let Mr. Wolf know when he comes down." He hung up and waved them forward. "Let's go." Quick had Vivienne go in front of him, so he could keep an eye out. Plus, she seemed able to communicate with others better than he did. The space in the facility was packed with stainless steel piping going everywhere. Across the walls and ceilings, out the roof, through the floor, and over the floor in an incredible maze. Cylindrical towers with knobs, turn valves, and openings spread throughout the area. Humans hurried around doing whatever it was they did. He focused briefly on the conversation between Brad and Vivienne. Luckily, Quick didn't pick up a scent of fear or deception from their tour guide. Brad went on about how safe everything was, and percentages of waste materials, and what they did with them. Most were shipped to other factories for further processing. That was nice, but what about those that weren't taken away? They turned a corner, and Mr. Wolf stood in the aisle in front of them, along with 2 thugs. "Brad," Mr. Wolf said, "thank you for escorting our guests this far. I will take it from here. You can go back to work." Brad ducked his head and retreated back around the corner. A second later, one of the men pulled a gun from inside his coat. It was clear from their scent that both men were shifters, also wolves. Chances were slim that he could take out 3 shifters. And with Vivienne there, he didn't want to risk her getting hurt. She stood stock still in front of him. Quick came up behind her and rested his hand in the small of her back, hopefully a reassuring sign. "What's up with the thugs, Wolf, and what about the gun?" "I thought you were helping us," Quick said. "You misunderstood, Mr. Alvarez," Wolf said. "I said I'd help, but I didn't say whom I'd help. I prefer to assist where I can keep money flowing into my pocket. That means my company." He smiled. "Now turn around and walk straight down the aisle." Neither Quick or Vivienne moved. The man with the gun stepped forward. Wolf said to Quick, "Your assistant is quite fragile, is she not?" "Not like us." Vivienne hiked her fists onto her hips. "What does that mean, asshole? Just because I'm female doesn't make me weak." Wolf's eyes widened, then he tossed his head back and laughed. After a bit, he slapped his hand on his chest. "Could it be, Mr. Alvarez, that she doesn't know the truth about you?" Quick needed to redirect this conversation. He spun Vivienne around in the direction Wolf had ordered. "We'll play this your way, Wolf. For now." The man laughed behind him as he gently pushed Vivienne forward. She tried to ask what Wolf was talking about, but he cut her off and shushed her. "Remember what I said earlier?" Quick whispered. "I hear you, Alvarez." "Oh, by the way," the bastard continued, "you're that infamous Alvarez boy, aren't you?" Quick's dread and anger jumped out of his control. He wasn't expecting this man to know anything about him. Wolf inhaled deeply. Quick was sure the shifter picked up that he was right. Quick was that infamous Alvarez boy. "I guess that means you are," Wolf said. "Last I'd heard, you were spotted in New Orleans. You've made your way here, I see. And with company." He glanced at Vivienne. With shifter speed, Quick was in Wolf's face, teeth bared. Unfortunately, the one bodyguard was between him and the bastard, shoving him back. "You touch one hair on her and I will shred you." Wolf looked bored. "I'm sure you'd try, Mr. Alvarez." He glanced at his watch. "I need to be going. My 4 o'clock will be here shortly." Naturally, there was no reason to cancel it. "Be a good boy, killer, and your friend may survive." He nodded. Quick glanced at the shifter holding a gun to Vivienne's head. A growl rumbled from his chest. "Put them in the room with the other one. I'll deal with them later. I have an EPA official to put into my pocket with the others." Quick wanted to jump on the guy and let his canine sink into soft, meaty flesh. The bodyguard shoved him. "Watch it or your girlfriend eats it." Quick simmered but stood still. The gunman waved them forward. "Keep walking." Quick whipped through scenarios in his head, trying to find an escape plan that would keep them alive and able to get to the boat. Before he could come up with anything, they'd reached their destination. "Stop here." They stood in front of a thick steel door, cut into a wall of iron. Whatever the hell they kept in here, they were serious about. The gunman stopped on the far side of the door next to Quick, while the other man opened the door next to Vivienne. She glanced at Quick and blinked. Was that a signal? When the door was partially opened, Quick spun and swiped a partially shifted clawed hand across the gunman's face and throat, wrenching the gun away with his other hand. Blood spewed from the shifter's severed jugular. He turned to find the other guard covering his nose with his hands, tears blinding his eyes. Quick took him down in a similar fashion and looked to Vivienne. "What did you do?" he asked. She scoffed. "Please, I do know some self-defense." A familiar voice came from inside the room. "Quick. Thank God." A dirty, tired Tico stumbled from the room. Quick grabbed a hold of his arm and helped him remain standing. "What are you doing here?" "We'll get into all that later. Let's move these bastards inside." Quick dragged in one body, while Vivienne and Tico brought in the other. "I'm Vivienne, by the way. It's good to meet you. Your mom's worried about you." They dropped the bodies and hurried out of the room. Quick closed the door and led them out following Wolf's scent. When they came to the first exit, they slipped outside and saw their boat across an expanse of weeds and grass. "Thank goodness," Vivienne said. "I was afraid we'd never find our way back." They hurried across the field. After hopping the fence and making their way on board the boat, Quick started the engine and threw it into high speed, jetting them across the bay. "We need to see the professor," Vivienne shouted over the wind. "He needs to know what's going on." Quick agreed with that. Wolf had nothing to tie them to the university, so they should be safe there. For a while at least.
Chapter 20. Vivienne. Vivienne practically fell onto the sofa in Professor Santali's office. Exhaustion didn't begin to describe how drained she felt. The teacher and student greeted each other with hugs. She listened in while Tico told his story to Quick and Santoli. She watched Quick while Tico talked. Something had changed about the way she felt about him, and it was making her uncomfortable. Among other things. She shoved those thoughts aside. She couldn't deal with emotions right now. She joined the conversation when it was time to decide the next step. I think Tico should come home for a while. Until this is settled, she said. He could be in danger from Wolf. I agree with that. Santoli nodded. Tico tensed. What about finishing the school year? I don't want to lose the credits. Don't worry about that. Give me your instructors' names and I'll meet with them. We'll set up a summer schedule to get you caught up. You won't be out anything. Thank you, sir. Tico sat back in his chair, clearly relieved. Santoli and Quick talked about whom to contact within the government. She reminded them about Wolf meeting the guy from the EPA. That definitely threw a wrench in things. Santoli said he would take care of everything. He had experience in dealing with issues like this, from 40 years in various organizations. Finally, when they were all done and back on enchantment, Vivienne could barely stay awake. Thank you for everything, Quick. You saved my life more than once, I'm sure. You're welcome, but if I hadn't carelessly insisted we stop the polluting that instant, you never would have been in danger. But you wouldn't have found me, Tico said. Like so many things these past couple days, she mused, nothing has been coincidence. Do you need me to get through the portal? She asked. No, Quick replied, it will recognize us and allow passage. Now that you've been to the Cay, the magic has been replenished. She wanted to ask him more about that, but she drifted off before any words made it into her mind. Chapter 21. Vivienne. Vivienne looked around the unfamiliar tropical surroundings. She startled and then she realized it wasn't real. She was in a dream. She didn't know how she got there, but in dreams that didn't mean much. And this definitely was a dream. The moon's light rippled along the waves, gently washing on the beach. The breeze was fresh and warm, comforting. A light taste of salt hinted in the air. Sand was soothing and cool under her feet. Behind her, a howl broke the night air. Her heart flew into triple time. Petrified, she turned around slowly, finding the jungle's edge only feet from her. Between the trees were iridescent flashes of color. A lupine face slipped between light and shadows. Through the blackness of the forest's gloominess, two rubies stared at her, then blinked. She wanted to run, but her feet were rooted in the sand. The largest wolf she'd ever seen stalked out from the forest. The sound of tendons stretching and bones crackling heralded the beast morphing from a wolf to a man. His eyes never left hers during his transformation. Within several steps, the animal was gone. A man walked in its place. Not just any man. Quick. She should be scared, or surprised at least, of what she'd witnessed. Oh hell. The man was completely naked. In real life, she'd be blushing so hard steam would float from her skin. But here in this dream world, with no one to witness her wantonness, she remained stoic, though she did keep her eyes above his waist. He stopped inches from her, his breath warm on her cheek. He took her face in his hands and kissed her. She nearly melted on the spot. You're not afraid of me? He asked, though no words passed between them. Should I be? I'm a shifter. Most on this island are. As soon as he said that, she knew it was true. She'd known what he was, even though the thought of him as an animal never crossed her mind. So many things made sense now, especially the time when Wolf called Quick a wolf. Oh shit. That meant Wolf was a wolf. Quick pulled away and looked into her eyes. He laid her on the soft sand. His calloused hands rubbed down her bare arms, then her hips. Goosebumps from his touch slid over her body. Suddenly, he was gone. A howl rent the night air, a howl of pain. She flew to her feet. Before her, Quick was being struck by bolt after bolt of lightning. His body smoked, limbs turning black and crusty. Vivienne spun around to the source of the lightning. Ricardo. Where the hell did he come from? He was a giant in her dream, standing taller than the trees. Hysterical laughter ripped from him with every shot he took at Quick. Stop, you bastard. He didn't even notice her. I will kill you for this. She brought her hands up, summoning a spell. His vile eyes looked down at her. Vivienne, good to see you again. He held up a hand, palm out. 1 second. He turned back to Quick and flicked his fingers. Quick burst into flames and crumbled into ash on the beach, mixing in with the sand washing out with the tide right before her very eyes. No. Vivienne bolted upright to a sitting position. Sweat poured from her body, her breaths were shallow pants. Her heart hurt with the thought Quick was dead. Then she realized it was all a dream. A damn dream. She was in her bed, in her bungalow. She didn't remember coming home. Quick must have helped her at some point. Staring at the ceiling, she thought back on her dream. It felt so real. But at the same time, Ricardo seemed like a distant memory. The wolf guy worried her more, that and Tico's safety. She grunted as she remembered the dream. Quick was a freaking wolf shifter. Or at least in her dream he was. She knew in her heart that was right. This was the first time she'd met a shifter, that she knew of, at least. She learned when she was young that witches and shifters didn't get along. But still, she liked Quick and the few others she met in her short time on the island yesterday. They were friendly, and seemed to have the same issues and emotions as everyone else on the planet. Okay, if she had to be honest, she more than liked Quick. Then she remembered the kiss Quick planted on her in the dream. Nothing she'd experienced even came close to that. If she wasn't careful, she could see herself falling for him. Really falling. Deeply. That scared her. She'd never had a prophetic dream before, but she realized some things about her had changed since stepping foot on the island. Things had become so confusing. Maybe it was better if she left the island to Quick. That's what he wanted. That way Ricardo wouldn't find her, Quick wouldn't get hurt, the island could survive. Yes, that was for the best, leave the island to Quick. A twinge of pain hit her right in the heart at that thought. She didn't want to leave this island or him. Chapter 22. Vivienne. After a shower and another new outfit, courtesy of her pre-filled wardrobe, Vivienne made her way out of her room toward breakfast. It had been a long time since she hadn't needed to worry about where her next meal was coming from, or had to count pennies to buy as little as she could in order to save for the next meal. She walked into the dining area, her mind still on Quick. Damn him. She wished she could shake him from her thoughts, but that would be no easier than shaking him from her emotions. She stopped at the doorway, surprised to see people at tables and browsing a buffet line. Yesterday when she'd arrived, she'd almost begun to think the island was nearly uninhabited, despite all the buildings. Today, there were people here. At the nearest table, a group of ladies looked at her and smiled. One was quick to get up and approach. Hi, Miss Devereaux. The lady wrapped her in a big hug. We're so happy you're here. We were worried what was going to happen, she paused, to the island until word got around that you'd arrived. The woman pulled away, but kept her hands on Vivienne's arms. I'm Chantal. Chantal turned to the table. And these are Suzanne, a brunette waved, Maddie, another woman raised her hand, and Ika, a porcelain-skinned beauty smiled. We'll let you get back to breakfast. It's great to meet you. And just like that, Chantal hurried back to her chair. Vivienne was shell-shocked with the friendliness. Not to mention the swiftness and brevity of the greeting. She never got a word in edgewise. Plus, she wasn't used to people coming up and touching her, much less holding her in a hug. Maybe it had happened before her parents died, when she lived at Greylands, but definitely not since then. As she made her way toward the cereal counter, others around the room called out and waved. She smiled and returned the waves, getting up the nerve to say good morning in return. The comfort and camaraderie in the room surprised her. She was welcomed by these folks, wanted even. They liked her even though she was a stranger who could ruin their lives with one real estate transaction. The thought broke her heart. Could she really do it? Could she handle it? Silly question, but could she keep this place going without running it into the ground? She knew nothing about running anything. She needed to find Quick. This was a question for him. After asking Chantal where his office was, Vivienne followed directions, hiking the stone path to the side of the main building. She entered without knocking. A man rose from behind the desk. Miss Devereaux. Oui, good morning. Wasn't expecting you so early. I was looking for Quick. He's out and about, on the island. Can Mays help? Mays, the one who'd walked her to her suite when she arrived. Quick's right-hand man. Sure. She gave him a smile. He picked up the phone, and Mays was at the door almost immediately. Good morning, Mays said. What can we help you with? She smiled. Can we talk privately? Absolutely. He stepped back, holding the door, and motioned her down the hallway. He led her to an office with his name on the desk placard, closed the door behind her, then took a seat. Would you like me to call Quick? He's doing his morning rounds. He can be here in a couple. He picked up a phone. No, she said. I don't want to bother him if he's working. Mays nodded and replaced the phone on the base. Actually, I think it's you I should talk to. Mays's brows lowered. Anything I can do to help, just ask. Vivienne had many questions, many matters she didn't understand about Skull Point. But what she wanted to know about most was Quick. She spent so much time with him, and had so many questions about him. What can you tell me about Quick? Is that his real name? Mays sat back, fidgeting with a pen, clicking it obsessively. She wanted to yank it out of his hands after a few moments. He was obviously uncomfortable with her question. I've called him Quick since we were young. He's just Quick. Quick to defend, quick to help, quick to step up. He's a man of action, doesn't like politics much, and treats everyone fairly. He's one of the best men I've ever met. So you've known him since you were kids? Mays steepled his fingers and rested his chin on them. His mother took me in more times than I can count, when my old man beat the hell out me. When she was killed, we both lost someone special. Adriana saved us when she took Quick on as if her own. Whoa. She didn't expect that. He lost his mother at a young age. And her aunt took Quick in, but also helped out his best friend. Vivienne found herself more than ever wishing she could have met her aunt. She could have used a family member like that. Mays continued. Now he runs the island for the most part. Ah yes. She recalled this from her and Quick's discussion. Right. He takes care of the operations, running of the business, and everything. Well, not everything obviously, he said. Not everything? She asked. His eyes narrowed again. He can't do magic. Only you do. You open the doors, cast enchantments or spells, keep the island under control. Hell. She really was required to use magic. She was okay using it to open another portal to find Tico, but more? No wonder Quick was so shocked when she said she didn't do magic anymore. Oh damn. How stupid could she be? This was so not good. Miss Devereaux? Mays said. She popped out of her self-imposed embarrassment. Yes, sorry, Mays. Vivienne, please. Just remembering something dumb I said earlier. He smiled. I'm sure it was fine. You haven't quite wet your feet yet. The paperwork you got from the lawyers can't cover everything. That's for sure, she said. Like how completely magic the island is. Mays tilted his chair down hard, startling her. Are you referring to that part about Quick's bio? Which part? She didn't even remember there being a bio about Quick. How'd she miss that? She thought back to Wolf calling him infamous. What did that mean? His face reddened. Just know one thing. She waited while his jaw worked. Quick isn't a murderer. That kill was justified. Chapter 23. Vivienne. The sand under Vivienne was warm, as she leaned against a palm tree at the edge of the beach, watching the sun as it traveled against the pristine sky. The morning had been a head rush, and she needed time to process not only the information, but also her emotions. Quick is a killer. Just when he seemed too good to be true. She'd be lying if she said it didn't frighten her. It brought Ricardo to mind, even though Quick seemed nothing like Ricardo. But Quick was huge and could crush her with one hand if he wanted. So why did butterflies still erupt in her tummy when she thought about him? And shit. These weren't humans but shifters. She knew her dream wasn't a lie. Quick was a shifter. She knew several of them on the island, had to be. She just wasn't sure which ones. Probably Maze, she imagined, there was something about him. Shifters. She swallowed hard. Beings she had zero experience with, who'd been the arch enemies of witches for centuries. An island of shifters. She could understand why the island was a secret for most part. If any of the witches in New Orleans got a whiff of this beautiful paradise, they would do anything in their power to control it and kill the shifters. A shiver rolled down her back. As long as I'm in charge, my people will be safe. My people? When did she start thinking of them as her people? The when part didn't matter. Fact was, she felt an allegiance with them. Just like she felt toward Shelia when she needed help. No one would harm what she was to protect. Not while she was in charge. Then she thought of what she'd just said to herself. As long as she was in charge, her people would be safe. When did she start thinking of herself as in charge? When did she decide to take over this responsibility? The enormity of it flooded her. This isn't some fantasy island TV show episode. This is real life with real lives that depend on me. Never before had she such responsibility. The most she'd had prior to losing her parents was to keep her goldfish alive. Wasn't very good at that. Failure wasn't an option. But this was so much. And what about all that magic stuff Maze spoke about? She wasn't trained in spellcasting. Her skills sucked. She couldn't even control her empath skills. They seemed to grow stronger, even. What was she getting into? She leaned her head back and let out a deep breath. The crashing waves couldn't ease her worried heart. The peacefulness that embraced her did not soothe her. Vivienne. Her head popped up, her spine stiffened. She held her breath and listened again. Vivienne. Someone was calling her. It came from the trees behind her. Vivienne rose and started walking, pushing away wild limbs and overgrown brush. Hello, she called out. Her sandals crushed leaves and twigs in her path. Maze? Quick? Who else would be looking for her? Vivienne. That voice wasn't Quick's. It wasn't Maze's. She didn't even think it sounded like a man's voice. Then again, it didn't quite sound human either. It almost sounded like it was in her head. No way. Hard to explain that one. She'd best keep it to herself. A fog had settled in front of her, a cool misty film that blurred her surroundings for a few seconds. She walked through it, still seeking the source of the voice. When she came out of the mist, she noticed a cave's entrance in the volcano she'd seen yesterday. A light twinkled in the cave's dark depths. She walked toward it, though she questioned the wisdom of her decision. Noticing a large branch that had broken off a tree to the side, she picked it up. At least I'm armed. She held it up like a bat and walked toward the opening, making her way up the few rocky feet needed to reach the cave's mouth. Vivienne. Definitely coming from within the cave, but still, it was as though it were in her head. As she made her way inside, the sunlight penetrated deeper than she thought possible. She turned a corner and was sucked into blackness. Her stomach rocketed into her throat as she began a free fall through nothingness. Now she would die. Wrong choice. Story of her life. Suddenly her body was doused in cold, very freaking cold water. She fought for the surface and air. How far under had she gone? Her lungs burned. Light filtered through the water as she approached the surface. She broke through the water's edge and gulped in a large breath. Damn, that was close. As she bobbed in the chilling water, she looked around at the cave surrounding her. It was made of rock, but nothing like the cave she fell from. These walls were covered in glistening crystals of every color. No sunlight penetrated the room, the gems glowed from a light within. The brightness varied, making the cavern feel like a magical lagoon. "This can't be real," she whispered under her breath, making for the shore so she could get out of the cold water. "It is." She turned to the left. A woman stood on the shore. Vivienne froze. She knew this woman. She'd seen her picture in the room she slept in. This was Adriana. But how could that be? "Get over here, child, before you freeze to death." Dressed in a colorful sundress that draped all the way to her feet, her hair in long braids pulled back, Adriana waved Vivienne out of the water. "Where am I?" she asked, though at the same time wondered if she was talking to a ghost. "You're in the Cave of Souls." Vivienne dog-paddled toward the woman. "Are you?" Though really Vivienne knew she was. She reached out. "I'm Adriana." Vivienne took her hand. She couldn't believe it. "But you died?" "Oh, that." Adriana waved a hand in the air. "Magic never dies completely." She winked. "Especially on this island." Vivienne sighed. "About this island." Her great-aunt laughed loudly, the sound echoing through the cave as she took a seat on a large boulder built for two. "Come sit with me." She sat and patted the rock next to her. Vivienne wrung out her shirt and joined Adriana. She wrapped an arm around Vivienne's shoulder and hugged her to her side. "I'm sorry about the drenching. But it was the only way to get you here the first time." "Here being the Cave of Souls?" "More specifically, the other side of the veil," her aunt replied. "Veil? As in between the living and—" She was going to say dead, but that didn't seem right. "Non-living?" Adriana laughed, throwing her head back. "Your intuitions are good." She remembered her dream. With a little warning, "Yeah, I got it." "Vivienne, I need your help." "More than yesterday?" Vivienne asked. "What you and Quick did yesterday was fabulous. Tico was in danger, but I wasn't able to help him. That's why I needed you then and need you now." "What could I possibly do to help you?" "I can't do spells very well, or any magic. I can barely waitress, and my dishwashing skills suck if you ask my old employers." Butterfingers, they'd called Vivienne after she'd dropped more than her share of plates and glasses. Once before her parents died, she'd had such a promising future, the daughter of the High Wizard and Witch, living with those who loved her and going to school to become a leader and High Witch herself. Then several years ago, her mom and dad were suddenly killed in a car wreck. Her uncle swooped in, had their bodies cremated, and took over High Wizard position before she had the chance to fly home from school. Worse yet, the headmistress of Greylands Academy for Witches in Philadelphia told Vivienne the funding had been cut for her education, and she had to leave immediately. Tears of frustration welled in Vivienne's eyes. "Stop that," her aunt insisted. "You are the daughter of the rightful leaders. You will get what's yours one day. Don't worry about that now. I need you. Skull Point Cay needs you." Vivienne nodded as she wiped tears from her cheeks. "Time is running short." Adriana turned to Vivienne and put a hand on each of her shoulders, squaring their sight on each other. "You need to run my island for me. I can no longer take part in the world outside the veil." "But I don't." She waved her hand in the air dismissively. "The power is in you. Magic is strong in our family. And it's time you let it out. You are a Devereaux. Your mother was a Devereaux. We come from a long line. You don't understand. There's this powerful warlock after me." Her aunt's eyes glazed over for a second. "Ricardo. I wondered if he'd get involved in some way." Adriana sighed. "You know Ricardo?" "Ricardo is a powerful wizard. He's been trying to get his hands on this island for ages. Vivienne paused to absorb what Adriana had just told her. He knew about this place all along. Her aunt didn't need to reply, the answer slapped Vivienne in the face. Meeting Ricardo at the bar she worked was no accident. He was there to find her. To trick her. Now everything, the spells to keep her under control, the constant hunting for her, it all made sense. He didn't want her, though. She realized he'd never wanted her, he wanted access to the island. Adriana was waiting for an answer. Vivienne nodded. I'm afraid so. Can he get to the island? I had to cast a spell to open the fog portal to get here, and to Galveston. Yes, but the ways of magic are mystical, even to those of us that have practiced it for ages. Don't worry, child. I will protect you the best I can. So will Quick. I don't know about that. I don't think Quick likes me. At least he didn't when we first met. Adriana exploded in laughter. Vivienne jumped, startled. I assure you that's not the case. Not at all. Auntie patted Vivienne's knee. Quick has had a rough past. He's a killer. He said his mom was killed. But didn't say. No. He is not a killer. Ask him. He's been more than a son to me. He's the heir of my heart, and you are the heir of my soul and my bloodline. Vivienne felt a pull on her like an invisible rope. We're out of time. Take care of my island. With Quick. You both need the island and it needs you. Make the magic happen to heal and help those who come. You will know what to do. The cavern began to spin. She raised a hand to her head. What was going on? She felt her insides shift. One more thing. Adriana sounded so far away. Tell Quick to stop feeling guilty. It was meant to be. Adriana's echoing voice faded to nothingness, as did everything else for Vivienne. Chapter 24. Vivienne. When the room stopped spinning, Vivienne found herself alone in the cave she'd entered a few minutes ago. She looked around for Adriana, but knew she wouldn't be there. That was the other side of the veil where she resided. Vivienne didn't understand all the aspects of the veil. She'd been kicked out of school before they delved into its secrets. Vivienne. She heard her name echo outside. Quick sounded desperate. Why would he be worried about her? She'd only been gone a few minutes. Vivienne, he shouted out again. She'd better go to him before he lost it. She made her way to the mouth of the cave. She stared around her, shocked. Outside, the sun was about to set. How was that possible? She hadn't been gone that long. No wonder the guy was tripping out. Quick, she yelled, I'm at a cave. Quick. Picking her steps carefully, Vivienne climbed down the slope to the flat ground. With the sun so low, it was hard to see exactly where her foot landed. Almost to the bottom, she relaxed her tenseness. Her shoes slid on flat pebbles and threw her off balance. She let out a short scream as she tried to keep from falling on her way down. From the corner of her eye, a body flew out of the woods and Quick was suddenly beside her. He grabbed her up before she tumbled down on the sharp rocks and slung her into his arms. When their skin touched, images of his life had flashed before her. She saw abuse, goodness, Adriana, and Maze. He stared into her eyes as his life passed through her mind. The one thing she didn't see was details about the killing. And Adriana had told her to ask him. Should she? Could she? Did you see everything? He asked. He knew, and she gasped at the realization. He knew she was an empath. No. Not everything, she whispered. He seemed a million miles away. What was he thinking? Quick? Yeah, he grunted, let's go. He set her on her feet, then started into the woods. There are some things about you that I should know about, aren't there? He gave her a look and remained silent. She started to wonder if she should have said anything at all, and was preparing an apology. And then it was as if the floodgates opened as he began to talk. We all, shifters kept low profiles since our small group lived on the edge of New Orleans. For years, our kind had kept a low profile. If anyone knew we were around, human or witch, they would have come after us. She knew what he was speaking of. She was familiar with the stories witches used to scare their children. Maze's dad was an asshole, not that mine was much better, so he was staying at my house a lot. Mom was always so worried something would happen to get us all caught. She had perfectly good reason for concern. Seemed Maze and I frequently got into dumbass fixes. Not on purpose. Trouble found us no matter where we were. Now that she couldn't relate to as a kid, but boy could she relate to trouble following her around after her parents died. She pushed her thoughts away and concentrated on what Quick was saying. Before we walked out the door, my mother would always kiss me on the forehead, tell me she loved me, and not to do anything dumber than usual. After a while, Maze got the farewell treatment as well. He pretended to hate it, but I knew he loved having someone care for him. His face softened as he talked about his mother. Maze and I were out celebrating my 16th birthday. Nothing was going on, so we came home earlier than we usually did. We were going to play video games and hang out in my room. When we opened the door, my mom was screaming and circling the dining room table, trying to get away from my dad. His eyes were wild, insane. Mom was covered in blood, her nightgown ripped halfway off her body. Claw marks had made deep gouges into her torso. She screamed at us to get out. Vivienne took his hand. Strong, large, and calloused, she held it tightly. Fury lit up his eyes. Dad launched over the table, grabbing my mother around the throat, taking her to the ground. He was choking her. What else could I do? I wasn't thinking. His voice was tortured. I picked up the knife and stabbed him. He refused to let go of her. I stabbed him again and he still refused. He kept a hold on her until he died. But by then, it was too late. My mother was gone. Sadness swept into her heart, but she remained silent, patiently waiting for him to finish, knowing he had more to say. The trial I went through was a joke. It was handled by the shifter community. The shifter judge and half the jury were my father's drinking buddies. I was found guilty. They handed down a death sentence. She gasped at the horror. But how is that even legal? Or possible? He scoffed. Shifters make their own rules among themselves. The night before the sentence was to be carried out, Maze broke me out. We came across Adriana. And here I am. He gave a short, strained laugh. Vivienne squeezed his fingers. The island has been the only safe place for us. My death warrant is still in place. There's a price on my head. He led her onto the back porch of her bungalow. She'd lost track of time and was surprised to see they'd arrived there. He paused, his face full of torment. And still, I let her talk me into going onto the mainland. How could I let her do that? How? Do you mean Adriana? He looked down at their clasped hands and said nothing. She tried again. Quick, did Adriana talk you into going to the city? Don't explore the island alone again. Do you understand? I can't keep you safe if you go running off unprotected. With that he turned, walked off the porch, then stopped. It is important to me, to everyone here, that you be a part of Skull Point. Vivienne leaned over the railing. I need to know what to do. Tell me quick, what is my purpose? It is the same as your aunt's, that you as her rightful heir should fulfill. He turned away and walked into the night. Chapter 25. Vivienne. Vivienne woke after a dreamless night, safe and sound, back in her hut, thanks to Quick's help. A dreamless night was a blessing after hearing Quick's story last evening. That was enough of an emotional roller coaster to last her years. He was a good guy with a heart big enough to do the right thing, even knowing the consequences would be deadly. Her heart went out to him. A noise on the back porch had her sitting up in bed. Sounded like a chair scraping the decking, as if being scooted from the table. Was someone on her porch? She glanced at the digital clock on the bedside table. 6 in the morning. She groaned. The sun was barely up. A knock sounded at the back door of her suite. The only person likely to be up and knocking on her door had to be Quick. Was there more to the story than he'd shared with her last night? More to him? She was eager to hear tea. She grabbed a robe and hurried down the short hall, throwing it on as she unlocked and opened the door. Nobody was there. Did he change his mind and leave? Maybe he was on his way around to the front door. She hurried to the side of the deck and leaned over the rail to look down the side of the bungalow. Nothing. A footstep came from behind her. What? How'd Quick get behind her? She turned around with a smile on her face. Ricardo's fierce glowing eyes met hers. Her smile vanished. She opened her mouth to scream, but not a single sound had a chance to come out. Ricardo's fist slammed against her head. The world spun and her knees buckled as pain shot through her jaw. Did you really think you could hide from me here? He grabbed her by the arms and dragged her toward the jungle. She tried to fight him, but she could barely focus, much less control her limbs. Slowly her vision cleared, but a searing ache stabbed her head with every jarring step he forced her to take. She tried to form the words, and finally pushed past the pain and wrapped her tongue around them. How did you get here? You can't get on the island. He laughed, then dropped her to the ground. She landed on her back, air forced from her lungs in a whoosh. You are so stupid. You really have no idea how powerful I am, do you? With Adriana gone, your fledgling powers could do little to keep me away. As soon as you opened the portal, I knew exactly where you were. He kicked her. Agony seared her thigh where his boot caught her flesh. He raised his foot again. She rolled away, trying to lessen the brunt of his kicks. Get up. Let's go. We have business to take care of. When she didn't move fast enough for him, he grabbed her hair and yanked. The new source of pain ripped a scream from her lips. He slapped a hand over her mouth and lowered his mouth to her ear. If you make another sound, I will slit your throat and let the wild animals eat your insides while they're still warm. Fear and pain doubled her over, dry heaving. Ricardo grabbed her upper arm and dragged her along. She tried to keep up, but couldn't. Her foot snagged a tree root, tearing her from his grip, sending her face first to the muddy ground. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Her ankle throbbed, blood trickled from numberless scratches. He lifted her with a jerk, tearing her robe and nightgown on thorns, leaving more gouges on her flesh. Let's get to the cave. With barely a whisper she asked, The cave? Why yes, my dear, he said, plowing through the bushes and twiggy limbs. We are going to have Adriana turn the island over to me. He would destroy the island. She knew it. Survival instincts kicked in, turning her wild. She clawed at his face, scraping out deep grooves. He yelled and threw her to the ground. Her ribs smashed onto rocks, the impact making her screech in agony. What did I tell you about making noise? He glanced around, then stepped forward and kicked her. You know what's ironic, he said as he kicked her again. I've been tracking you so I could bring you here and you were already waiting for me. He kicked once more. I couldn't have planned this any better. Leaves crackled nearby. Ricardo whirled toward the sound. Vivienne tried to see what had made the noise. You can thank me then, asshole. Quick's tone was laced with steel. After I kill you. Tears of relief flowed down her cheeks at the sound of Quick's voice. Bones crackling filled the air, just like in her dream when Quick shifted from a wolf to human form. Was he shifting into his animal? A ground-shaking howl tore through the early morning air. Ricardo laughed. Stupid-ass shifter. You think you can injure me? He raised his hands and a bolt of lightning flew from his fingertips. Quick dove forward, sliding under the oncoming electricity, then swiped at Ricardo. Ricardo lunged backward, but Quick's fangs still raked his leg. Ricardo yelled, his face turning red to match the bloom of blood on his khaki pants. Another deadly bolt shot toward Quick's wolf, this time hitting him in the chest, sending him flying back, slamming into a tree. Quick slid down, then slumped to the side. No. Quick. She tried to pull herself off the ground, but pain shot through her body, slowing her down. Ricardo glanced at Vivienne and laughed. You are so pathetic. He turned back to the unconscious Quick, still in his wolf form. Now to finish this, and finally have the island for myself. He raised his hands over his head. Vivienne had to do something. For the first time, she regretted not having the magic to fight. If she made it through this, she swore to learn the gifts she'd been granted. Ricardo mumbled, chanted. The air around her became oppressive. She didn't need to know skills to know what he was doing. He was conjuring a death spell to kill Quick and his wolf. She couldn't let that happen. She had to do something. But what? She concentrated, called on Adriana in silent prayer, begging her to help her save Quick. Then she raised her hand and snapped her wrist. A sapling behind Ricardo bent backward, then whipped forward, catching Ricardo in his knees. He fell with a yelp, his head bouncing off a tree trunk. And then he was motionless. Could this be it? Was he dead? No, she didn't trust it to be. She concentrated again, called on Adriana once more to help her, and pulled a tree on top of Ricardo. Then another. If he was alive, that might not keep him tied up forever, but it would keep him busy while she checked on Quick and maybe could get some help out here. She looked toward Quick. His chest raised with a breath. Tears of relief sprang to her eyes. Using the foliage and rocks, she dragged herself to her feet and limped toward Quick. Every step shot agonizing pain through her. She fought to stay conscious, refusing the easy escape her mind promised if she only let herself sink into oblivion. Stretching toward him, her hand landed on his paw. She squeezed with her last bit of strength to bring him reassurance. To make sure he held on. Movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. Ricardo moaned, and the trees flew off him with the swish of his fingers. He put his hand to his head, and it came back bloody. His eyes fixed on her. Fury like she'd never seen rolled through Ricardo. He crawled out of the foliage. This ends now. His fisted hand reached forward, ready to fling a spell. Drained from casting without the developed mana that witches who were trained would have, she had nothing left to use to fight him. With her hand on the fur of one man who held her heart, a resigned sigh left her. A bright light flashed, blinding Vivienne. Get off my island. Adriana's voice was menacing. He gasped. But you're dead. They said you were. Sorry to disappoint you. Now leave. And never return. Vivienne tried to process this. How did Adriana manage to cross the veil? She'd have to ask her. Or Quick. Quick. She glanced at the wolf next to her. He was still unmoving. Please let him be all right. Her heart ached thinking he might be gone from her life. In your dreams, witch. This island will be mine. With its immense latent power, I will control the planet and every witch and wizard on it. All will bow to me. Starting with you. He flung his hands outward. A dozen lightning bolts shot toward Adriana. Before the bolts could make impact, a translucent shield appeared in front of Adriana, reflecting the deadly daggers back to Ricardo. His eyes popped wide. His arms flew up to protect himself as he cowered against a tree. With a flash that blinded Vivienne, Ricardo was gone. She couldn't have said later if it was the lightning bolts that annihilated him or if he vanished just before they struck him. She turned to look at Adriana, but the spot where she'd been was empty. Vivienne glanced down at Quick. A single shallow breath told her he was still hanging on, though it seemed a tiny thread kept him alive. The sounds of leaves rustling in the trees made her flinch. Now what? She swallowed hard. She could hardly breathe from the pain with which each breath racked her body, and the light was fading, everything drawing to a darkness. Chapter 26. Vivienne. Vivienne woke, but didn't open her eyes or move. She barely had the strength to breath. She picked up the odor of hospital disinfectant. Her memories came flooding in. The fight with Ricardo, Quick's injuries, and Adriana. Quick. Quick. Her eyes flew open. She was in an infirmary, on a hospital-type bed. There, Quick's head resting by her side, his handsome face in repose. Even in his sleep, he is gorgeously haggard with a scruffy chin and messy hair. Vivienne took a deep breath, letting out a sigh, and a searing pain shot through her chest. Her body seized. In a flash, Quick awoke and snapped to attention in the chair he'd pulled up to the bed. Noticing she was awake, he sprang to his feet, grabbed her hand and leaned over her, his face inches from hers. He took her hand and brushed his fingers along her cheek. "You scared the devil out of me. Thought we lost you." She smiled. "Can't get rid of me that easily," she managed to scratch out from her dry throat. "I'm glad of that," he said. He tilted his head down and laid his lips on hers. The heart monitor suddenly beeped twice as fast. He pulled away quickly. A throat cleared from the other side of the room. Her cheeks grew hot. May stood in the doorway, grinning like a kid splashing in a mud puddle. He strolled in and leaned against the bed. "How you feeling, kiddo?" Her brow scrunched. "Since when am I kiddo?" May's smile widened. "Since I carried you to the clinic. Good thing I was in the vicinity when Quick howled. I have to say, neither of you look too healthy. What happened out there?" She looked to Quick. He shrugged. "All I know is some guy shot me with lightning bolts." "Ricardo? What happened to him?" She had questions. Lots of them. But it would hurt too much to talk. Mays nodded and headed for the door. "I have lots of stuff to do since I'm filling in for the boss while he takes care of you. I'll check in later." Quick growled at his second-in-command, and Mays released a stream of laughter and closed the door behind him. What was he talking about? Taking care of her. Quick turned to her. He's never been good about minding his own business. She thanked goodness for that, else Quick would have been strung up long ago had Mays not saved him from being lynched for killing his father. "I should let you rest. You're not a shifter. It's not like you can morph and heal yourself like we do." His eyes turned sad. "I guess this means you're probably going to sell the island. I can understand why. We never had any problems before we lost Adriana. It's like the entire island has been flipped upside down. I don't know what happened. But you're safe now. Tico's home with his mom, and I have a lot of work to do together to get the island back to Adriana's standards." Vivienne thought back to her meeting with Adriana in the cave. She had so much to think about, but first, she swallowed hard. She'd have to talk, no matter how much it hurt. This was important. "Quick, how did Adriana die?" His eyes snapped to hers while he chewed on his lip for a moment. "It's my fault. Adriana needed to go to the attorney's office for some reason, and she insisted I be the one to take her. She knew I hated going to the mainland, but she wouldn't let it go." Vivienne recalled Adriana's words in the cave. "On our way out of the office, someone must have recognized me. I'm wanted dead or alive, and I guess they chose dead. A barrage of bullets assaulted us. I got Adriana back to the boat and the island, but before I could get her help, she was gone." He shook his head. "I should have never stepped foot off the island." She squeezed his hand, letting him know she was there for him. "As I held her, she told me she wished to give me the island. She never had children. But whether she wanted that or not, it couldn't be. Shifters can't do magic. We both knew I couldn't be the heir. When she died, a huge piece of me had been ripped out. And then you came along." Pushing aside the pain, mental and physical, Vivienne said, "Adriana isn't gone. The island holds her soul." "I don't understand." "You're not supposed to. It's magic." It dawned on Vivienne, that was the theme of her entire life. She never understood why her parents had to die when she was so young, thrusting her out of a safe living and away from friends and school. She didn't understand why, when she returned home, her uncle wanted her killed. Or even why had she gotten mixed up with Ricardo and his evilness. She wasn't supposed to understand. It was fate. It was magic. Exhaustion pulled on her mind, but she had one thing she had to tell him. "Quick, listen to me." He squeezed her hand. Adriana told me it's not your fault she died. No, he murmured, it is. Listen, you stubborn shifter. She paused, fatigued from the effort of staying awake and talking. She said that if she hadn't died, things would not have happened the right way. You mean she foresaw this? She saw her own death. Vivienne didn't know her eyes closed until she opened them. Didn't realize she hadn't answered him until later. Not that she was sure of any of the answers. Was he gone? She had to tell him one more thing. Quick. Her hand lifted. I'm here. I'm not selling. I'm staying. What changed your mind? Blinking rapidly, she said, I have a reason to stay, to try. Her eyes closed. You. Epilogue. Vivienne. Several days had passed since Vivienne was released from the clinic. She sat behind Adriana's desk. The large rosewood monstrosity was filled with papers, files, and ledger books. Nearby, Quick was moving boxes aside. Tell me about the island, she asked. With box in hand, Quick straightened. Whenever you're ready. Now's good. He set the box on the desk. A few hundred years ago, shifters, mainly wolf, but others too, had been hunted down and were being transported by ship to other lands for sport hunting. One such ship never made it to its destination. It was set upon by a pirate ship. A pirate ship led by a woman. Really? That had to be rare. Quick nodded. The pirates only wanted the treasure, but this captain, she was a remarkable one. She recognized the shifters for what they were. She gave them refuge on her island, Skull Point Cay. Vivienne gasped. Right here. SHR had no idea of the history had her family been involved? Quick, what about? Let me finish. He touched his fingertip to the tip of her nose. That pirate captain was your and Adriana's ancestor. One Catalina Devereaux. She jumped out of her seat. I knew it. Sorry, I guess it's kind of exciting. Was that your ancestor too? Somehow? He shook his head. My past is composed only of the simple, unvarnished facts you already know. Nothing fancy or exotic. Adriana took me in and became my adopted mother. Vivienne nodded. She got it. So, his ancestors weren't involved during the early history of the island. Quick continued. Since the time of that pirate captain, Witch and the island's shifters formed an alliance. The Skull Point Alliance. Shifters went on to become her crew. The island became their protector. It's always been a safe haven for shifters. She eventually took one of the shifters for a mate. And as to the Devereaux name, that's when your clan became matriarchal. The women never took their mate's name. Kept their own as Devereaux, as did all the girl children who were all witches. Vivienne sat back. I never knew. And my family in New Orleans, they wanted to be coven leaders. To replace my parents. A thought occurred to her. So Quick, what's the purpose of the island? The alliance? It exists? I mean, I know the island exists, she laughed. It's just that the alliance, all that, does that have something to do with the island's magic? Yup. We help out shifters. When it's needed. I suppose we'd help witches too, he said with a frown, if we could trust them. How do you know who to help? Or what to do? We've never had a problem. But it has to be an alliance. That involves a witch and shifters. The witch helps the island. The shifters, well, he said as he smiled, we do whatever else needs doing. But you know I don't do magic. I wasn't trained. She didn't want to say it, but she couldn't cast herself out of a paper bag with her casting skills. We'll get you some help. For now, just the basics, you have the instructions in the papers. She nodded, wondering where she would procure a witch to tutor her. And how is this all funded? The trust fund, where does all the money come from? That wild witch with the dark hair and the dark skin, the original pirate, Catalina Devereaux, had amassed quite a fortune. Wise investments have grown the fortune. Massively. She shook her head in amazement. That means? A knock interrupted her. Hey, you two. Maze had popped his head inside. We have a security breach. Keep reading for an excerpt of the next Skull Point Alliance book.
I hope you've enjoyed this latest production. Don't forget to subscribe and to ring the bell to be notified of new releases.